No torment involved, Lisa. Just I have a thought experiment I want to do with you guys tonight. I'm just making sure everything is as it should be. I got some bunch of things going on right here. All right. Thumbs up if you guys can hear me and see me. There's a little bit of a delay here. All right. Thank you, Lisa. All right. So if you can, if you're driving a vehicle or operating some type of heavy machinery, I don't want you to close your eyes on this, but if you can, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine yourself as the Apostle John sitting here on the beach. It's about 95 AD. You are presently 79 years old right now. If John was 17 during Christ's crucifixion. Close your eyes, and I want you to imagine yourself on this beach. It's 95 AD. You're the elder John. You've been banished to the island of Patmos as a punishment by the Emperor Domitian. They've already tried to kill you a couple of times. It didn't work. So this was the only way they could get rid of you, was to put you on this island and just leave you here to die. And you're here on the beach and you're worshiping the Lord. John was in his spirit in the Lord's day. And then something miraculous happens, something you never would have imagined could happen. The Lord Jesus Christ shows up, not in the way you remember him, but now in his glorified form. And when you see him, you fall over as dead. And Jesus reaches down and restores you back to health just simply by touching your shoulder. And he bids you to stand up, and he's got a message for you. He's got a message that is going to be uh, heard around the world for the next 2,000 years. So everything that's going to be shown to you, you're looking at these things from a first century perspective. Okay. Now, this is going to explain a lot of why there is symbolism in the book of Revelation and why it's used as a tool. But the symbolism isn't arbitrary. It isn't enigmatic. It's not um, unknown. The symbolism that we're going to be using tonight or seeing is symbolism that we see both in the Old Testament and in other places in Revelation in the Bible as well. We see in Revelation at least 25 times that John is told to look, and he sees something. He either sees it or he hears it. And then on one or two instances, he's actually instructed to do something. He's told to write these things down, and he does that with the churches, the seven letters to the seven churches. So he's simply dictating, or he's simply writing down what Christ is dictating to him. Another instance where he's told to do something physically is to go measure the temple and to measure the outer courtyard so that the Gentiles have a place to go to in Revelation 11. But you are this isn't simply a series of visions that he's seeing. I just want to make sure that that's clear for folks. He's seeing with his eyes, he's hearing with his ears, he's touching with his hands, he's doing things with his hands, he's presumably moving around from place to place, and he's being shown these things that, you know, I can only imagine him having this monumental task of describing things that he's never seen before. Well, let me proceed here for a second. So here you are, you're John, you're on the island of Patmos, and just as I mentioned earlier, who would appear but the resurrected Christ and the glorified Christ? And here we see in Revelation 1:17, and when I saw him, now I, I couldn't put all of the instances on here for the things that he saw, but uh, there's at least 25 instances, and you could simply do a word search if you wanted to look at it yourself in the book of Revelation. It's a lot. But what happens is he sees the resurrected Christ, he sees him standing in the midst of the golden lampstands. John is told to write down what he sees. And then after he's finished, he records the seven letters to the seven churches. What happens next is that he sees a door open in heaven. He said, after these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And he hears this voice like a trumpet that says, come up here. So he goes up there. Then what does he see? He sees the throne room. He sees the sea of glass. He sees the throne with the rainbows and the emeralds and the all of the glory and grandeur of God's throne room. And then we fast forward a little bit. We see some inner workings in the throne room scene. Obviously, the 24 elders, the four living creatures, the myriads of angels. And then we see in the midst of everyone, one standing there like a lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And we know this to be Jesus Christ. It says, now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals. He's given the seal. He's the only one in all of creation that is able to take this scroll out of the right hand of the Father. And not only to take it, but to open it, to begin to open it. He opens the seals, and a series of judgments pour out on the earth. This leads to the introduction of the beast, or the beast kingdom, the rider on the red horse who takes peace from the earth, the rider on the black horse who brings in great economic famine and disparity between the huddled, starving masses and the very, very wealthy and the elite. And then the last rider on the horse is the rider on the pale horse, who, followed by death and hell, brings in all manner of death and destruction to the planet, and a quarter of the world's population dies. He then he sees these angels, but then he hears that a number of people have to be sealed first before the judgments can proceed. And he is told here that these would be the 144,000, and they would be from the 12 tribes of Israel, 12,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel. He sees a mass of people that nobody could number. It was beyond any type of reckoning by human standards to measure or count, and neither did he hear the words to how many there were. Yet he records it down as he's faithfully told to do. We proceed into the judgments, and he saw the seven angels who stand before God, and they get ready to blow their trumpets after the seventh seal. They blow their trumpets, and then a number of judgments happen. These are cataclysmic and terrifying judgments upon the earth. But one of the ones I want to draw in particular to is the horsemen, these demonic, or I don't know what they are, spiritual, fallen angel type spiritual demonic horsemen, and their number was 200 million. And note that he says here, I heard the number of them. So John is seeing, he's hearing, he's interacting, because he's asking questions back and forth with the example of the elder when he asked, who are these people and the elder explains they are the ones that have come out of this great tribulation. And now he's hearing the number of these horsemen. So he's getting the whole five senses vibe going on here, filling in the details for us. But he's doing this again from a first century perspective. Next, we see it seems like he would move because of where he's being shown and taken things to, and this is a little speculation on my part, but I would assume he's walking around or being taken to different places in the heavenly realm, shown these different things. And here he is told to, then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, rise and measure at the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. He sees the two witnesses begin their ministry. He sees this beast rising out of the ocean, and it seems like this sea, although it is representative of the many peoples and nations in the Gentile world, you remember he's on this little island in the Mediterranean. I can imagine him using this imagery or seeing this imagery, and it's relatable to him, and he's seeing this beast rising up, and it's the same kinds of beast that he remembers from the book of Daniel, and he would have been very familiar with the book of Daniel. But he's getting these beasts in the reverse order, not in the order that they're given in Daniel. And then the next chapter, and there are no chapters in when this was all written. I mean, this chapter and verse didn't come around until the 13th century or so, but the next chapter here in 14, he sees, he's looking, it seems like he's being shown something from beyond, like maybe at the end, and he sees this, he sees Christ there, glorified Christ, with these 144,000, and they're on top of Mount Zion, right? We get the angels flying through the heavens, giving their messages that they're told to give. The angels with the sickles are told to reap the earth. He sees the temple and the tabernacle there in chapter 15, and he sees the angels that are getting ready to be handed these bowls, for them to fill up the bowls of wrath that they're given to them by the one of the living creatures. He says, then I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the seven angels, go and pour out the bowls of wrath of God on the earth. And tonight is where we begin. But here he sees a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, and her name was, or on her head was this name, which was full of names of blasphemy. And so tonight we'll be going through probably what I think one of the hardest and most difficult chapters to really to deal with, primarily because there's so many things in here that are confusing. You have to sit there and really think about it. And I know there's a lot of great teachers out there, and I guarantee you, if you put all of the current prophecy teachers in a room together, we'd all probably disagree on everything within Revelation 17, and that's okay. And like I said, I've said almost on every video I've done, uh, A, we're not going to agree on everything. B, um, there's some things here that are going to happen. We don't know how they're going to play out. We don't know how this is all going to shake out. We only know that it will happen, just as the Bible says it would. After that, we see in 18 the system of the Babylonian system. Maybe it's a great city. Maybe it's some kind of a global structure in place. Again, don't want to get too wrapped in that. But then the last portions here is that John sees the final countdown, the final uh, um congregation of the world's armies that march against Jerusalem. But then at this precise time is when Christ peels back the skies. And imagine the kingdom here is completely in darkness at this point, or very dark. The skies peel open, and this blinding light comes out, and Christ comes forth riding with the armies of heaven in tow behind him. And Christ wages war against all of the armies, defeating them and casting the beast and the false prophet alive into the lake of fire, 1,000 years ahead of everyone else. Now, I did this in this way because I just want you to kind of put yourself in John's shoes and kind of get a little perspective on maybe how he's seeing things. He's being shown these fantastical things, and he's trying to, and trust me, I think he did the best job anybody could do given his circumstances in describing the book of Revelation. It's perfect. It's exactly as it's supposed to be. Um, and you can just see this monumental task. And I thought it would be kind of neat to draw it out this way. All right, but let's keep going because we have a ton of stuff to go through tonight. I have, I'll read, I'm going to read the passage and then pray, and then we'll go through it as has been our pattern to do. But let's get started reading. It's a little bit of a lengthy chapter, but I'll try to go through it as quickly as possible and as um, understandable as possible. Chapter 17, verse 1. Then when one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. But the angel said to me, "Why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, and whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. And when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is, here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings, 5 have fallen, one is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not and is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are the 10 kings, and have received no kingdoms as of yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. They will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. Then he said to me, "The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate, naked, and eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God will put it in their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is the great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth." All right, let's pray real quick and we'll get started. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the time tonight. We pray that you would bless this study through your word. We pray that you give us understanding, that this would provide edification for the group and for the body of believers here, and that you would bless anybody that comes across this later on. And ask, Father, that this would be made understandable to those who are listening, and that through all of this, Lord, we might gain understanding and make sense of the things that we see going on in our world today. Lord, we thank you for sending your Son to die for our sins on the cross, because without him there would be no hope. So we thank you, and we lift his name, the name above all names, the name of Jesus Christ. And it's his name we do pray. Amen. All right. Let me get my notes out here. All right. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there's around 25 places in the book of Revelation where John sees or hears or does something. So this is a very hands-on. This wasn't like he was knocked out and then everything came to him by a dream. No, he was able to see these things. He was conscious, he was awake, and he was being shown what is to come, right? And I don't remember the exact passage off the top of my head, and I just thought about it, but it's the instance where Peter was asking about, this is after the resurrection, and Jesus is telling Peter that he is going to be led somewhere where he doesn't want to go, speaking about his future death. And then Peter points at John, and in the Gospel of John, it's the one whom Christ loved. Yeah, he identifies himself. Uh, he says, "What about that guy?" And Jesus says, "Don't worry about him. You worry about you. What is it to you?" Or I forget the exact wording, but to the effect of, and I might be conflating two different passages here, but you have that passage and you have the one that some of you will not see death until you will see the kingdom of heaven before. Um, oh gosh, I'm blanking on this, and I just thought about it right now. But it's where Jesus tells them that some of you or one of you will not perish before you see the kingdom of heaven come. And I think this is that instance where God is showing John, who is at this point the last living apostle, um, shown the future, shown everything. And he sees it with his own eyes. He sees it and hears it with his own ears. So that prophecy was literally fulfilled. And that John was able, he was the one that was able to see all of these things. And in doing so, it wasn't just that God showed him and that John goes back to Patmos. He um, remembers some of it, makes up some of the other stuff. No, he's told to record and write everything down verbatim. And so this is a very accurate description of the things that are to come, and it is born true this whole time. Not only that, and not only is it born true, but we can see how the seven letters to the seven churches. I mean, to me, that adds credence to the fact that you don't just have John getting the revelation in 95 AD, and then we have 2,000 years of nothing, and then boom, it's the 70th week again. That is how it's going to happen in the overarching structure of it, but we have 2,000 years of church history also taken into account, and I do believe that that's what we see there in chapters 2 and 3. Now, I bring all that up to say this because when we get into Revelation 17, there's a lot of it's hard. There's a lot of things in here that we have to contend with and try to make sense of. And as is my way of doing, I like to show in some type of a diagram or something because I'm a visual learner and I do better looking at things and trying to break things down in a visual format than simply trying to explain it. And I think it's more beneficial for you guys as well. But I do want to caveat this by saying my charts and stuff like that. I don't. They are not scripture. They are my brain power looking at things, going through the Holy Spirit and looking at the Word and trying to make sense of these things. So I don't claim that this is um, absolutely infallible. I am not speaking or teaching ex cathedra. I'm not the oracle of God when I'm sitting on this chair. I'm not like the Pope. uh, I'm simply one student of Bible prophecy that loves the Lord and wants to do his best in being diligent and showing you what I've learned. And it may not exactly happen this way, but I think it'll be somewhat close. I think Lee's teachings will be close. I think John Barnett's teachings will be close. I think uh, um, Kerry Michael's teachings will be close, or Michael Carey, sorry. David Reagan, David Jeremiah. I mean, there's a whole bunch of us out there that have been teaching on or through Revelation, and we get to certain points of the book, and we all wrestle with certain things in terms of understanding. And this is one of those chapters because uh, you think you've got Revelation 12 and 13 down with the heads and the horns and all that, and then you always forget about Revelation 17, and you go to Revelation 17, and it throws this huge monkey wrench into everything. So it's a definitely a challenging chapter to go through. But let's continue. Now, in the beginning of it here, it says, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, come, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. Now, I wanted to know, and this is just me because I'm weird like that. I wanted to know which angel was it that came and showed him because We know that the seven angels had these seven bowls that were poured the wrath out. And so one of these angels comes and shows him and begins to explain everything to him. And I was curious as to which angel, which judgment, which bowl judgment is the one that came and showed him. And I think that for you guys, maybe that may be some type of homework you might want to go look up and see if you can find any kind of answer to it. I couldn't find it, but I didn't look that long because this question came into my head about yesterday or the day before, and I just began thinking about, is does it even matter which angel it was? We know that it was one of the angels with the bowls, but does it matter which bowl? And it's just a curiosity of mine to ask that kind of question. Like, man, I wonder which bowl was it? Was it the one with the loathsome sores, or is it the one that was poured out on the sun, or was it the one that was poured in the air? So whichever one it was, I would be curious to find out, or maybe get your thoughts on it, maybe as to which is there a particular judgment that might uh, play into why that angel was the one that comes and shows John these things. But the question then moves to, who's the harlot? What is the harlot? What is this angel talking about? So it says, "Come and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away, the angel carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." And I want to get to a point here because I want to show you why I think this is who it is. I'm going to skip down to verse 6, and it says, "I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus." Now, I I think I heard this from I can't even remember who I heard it from now. Maybe John Barnett a while back, or it may have been Lee, but he was talking about the I always just thought it was the tribulation saints, but man, it could have been Lee. I'm not lying on this, but the fact that these two groups are distinguished makes me, or I would agree with this assessment that it's speaking to both the Old Testament saints who died, these are the saints that were uh, not the church, and they came and died before Jesus ever came, but they were looking forward in time to the arrival of the Messiah, somebody that would come and save them, the Redeemer, the same Redeemer that Job was looking forward to seeing with his own eyes. You remember that? I think it's in Job 19. And Job lived around the time of Abraham. I mean, he was way before Moses and all of those folks. So even he was looking forward to a coming Redeemer. And those saints, many of them throughout the Old Testament, were killed for their faith, killed for their belief in the one true God. They were persecuted even by the religious system that they were under. Uh, when Judah and Israel would go through their periods of paganism, or these times when these evil kings were ruling in Israel and in Judah, you only had a handful of really good kings. The rest of them were either bad or really bad, and they became authoritarian and they began to persecute the people of God as well. So it's both the Old Testament saints and the New Testament saints here. It says, "And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints." She was drunk with the blood. She was drunk with the blood of the saints, which means that she had become gluttonous on this, call it an orgy of blood. She was uh, could not get enough, could not be satiated on the killing of the people of God. Now, here it says, on her forehead was, this is verse 5, on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. So if she's the mother of harlotry, and in this instance here, we're not talking about the world's oldest profession, we're talking about spiritual harlotry, and the spiritual harlotry goes all the way back to really the first history that we have recorded after the flood, which was at the Tower of Babel, as we see there in Genesis 10 and 11. And the key figure that we see in Genesis, beginning in 10, I believe. I mean, let's go back and read that real quick. So Genesis 10 has the genealogy. So Genesis 5 has a genealogy, and Genesis 10 has these are the first two series of genealogies we get. And this is detailing or giving detail to the sons of Noah, and then the three sons of Noah, and then their offspring, which would go on to create the 70 nations that would exist, the table of nations there at the beginning, right after the flood. Now we get to the sons of Ham. So you had the three main sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, going through the sons of Ham in 10:6, it says, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Now, we know that Cush is uh, largely associated with the area around Ethiopia and um, Sudan. The Mizraim is the Egypt. Mizraim is another. It was the original name for Egypt. So even today, many Egyptians still refer to Egypt as Mizraim. We have the son. His name is Put, P-U-T, and that has largely been identified as the area we know today as Libya. And then the last son there is Canaan, who is came to inhabit the land of what we know of today as Israel, and what would become known as the Promised Land in the time of Moses. But at the time of Moses, it was also called the land of Canaan. Now it says the sons of Cush were, and it starts going through the sons here. And I'm only going to read this next two verses because, or the next three verses. So we have Cush begot well, let me go through this real quick because you'll see the difference here. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Septeka and Ramah, and the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. Now we know Sheba and Dedan is Saudi Arabia. I know personally because when I was in Saudi Arabia, there was a place there called Sheba, and it was they very much believe, the Saudis believe that they were Sheba and Dedan. So it's not just us believing that, they believe that. Now, note this next verse here in verse 8, let me back up here. Verse 7, it says, the sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Septeka. And then it says, the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. But then it says, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. Well, if Cush was a son of, or if Nimrod was a son of Cush, why wasn't he listed with the other sons? Why was he separated out? So it said the sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, etc., etc. But then the next verse it goes down, it says Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. And if you were to read the Septuagint version of this passage or of the Old Testament here, Nimrod is identified as a giant. So something goes different with Nimrod, and some theologians speculate that he was adopted by Cush. He was not a natural son, but an adopted son, and that's why he was listed separately. In verse 9, it says, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, and Keilah. And then it lists some other cities here. Now, when you go to chapter 11, you see that verse 1, the whole earth had one language and one speech. So they'd come off the ark, they begin to migrate south to what would be relatively, I can't remember the name of it. It's a triangle, but it sits in northern Iraq and southeastern Syria. And there's an area there that people believe that that's really where the Tower of Babel was. So when we think about the Tower of Babel, most people want to associate it with the ziggurat structure that's down south of Baghdad, Iraq. I think it's about an hour south of Baghdad, and I can't think of the name of the place, but um, I've flown the whole length and breadth of Iraq, and was flying when we were back in the war at that time. Flying helicopters over that place. Um, it's interesting to me because I never really believed that it was that far south. And here's some speculation on my part. If they had come off the ark and they were making their way down, we're assuming this is taking years and months and years, and they're finally migrating down to what we call the land of Shinar, or the Fertile Crescent, this valley there in Iraq. That valley extends all the way up into Syria, and if the flood waters were still receding, southern Iraq is largely almost sea level. I mean, it's very, very low elevation. And in fact, up until about the time of the 1950s or so, most of southern Iraq was like swampy marshland, and it never really fully dried. In fact, you had a lot of Shiites that lived down in the marsh areas, and had lived there for thousands of years. Whole communities had lived there, and just they made living in the marsh areas their home, much in the same way that uh, a lot of people live out in the bayous in Louisiana. I mean, places where most people wouldn't normally live. They adapted to it, and they made it their own. So there's whole I don't want to say civilizations, but there's whole big communities, or there were big communities of Shia believers that were living down in these areas. And it wasn't until Saddam Hussein's father came along and began to, and I think Saddam Hussein as well, began to drain the marsh areas there. And now it's largely just kind of like a desert. You do have some vegetation and stuff that grows along the Tigris and Euphrates, but for the most part, that's it's mostly dry desert now. But think about it: if you've come off the ark and the waters are still receding, I don't know that you would go that far south, because it would either be super muddy, still underwater. If the Babel incident was maybe 2 centuries after, or a couple hundred years after the Noah and his sons got off the ark, it's likely that that area was either still underwater, or it was not livable because of the mud and the marsh swampiness of it. So I tend to believe personally that that Babel was a lot further north than what we think of it today. Nevertheless, I rabbit trailed on that a little bit. I apologize. But when we look back in history and we look back to this incident here at Babel, and we know that Nimrod was the one who built it, a lot of the historical information we have about Nimrod comes from non-biblical sources. Uh, the Josephus had a history of the Jewish people. We had other places that we could go to, but we know that Nimrod had a wife, and her name was Semiramis. Um, and in their marriage, they supposedly had a son named Tammuz, and that through this trio, this little family here, begins the what we would call the birth of the mother son cult. And this would go on and begin to morph and change for the next, from that time until today. And let me go through some of the story on this. So you had Nimrod, who's often linked to the founding of Babylon. He was described as a mighty hunter and a ruler who defied God. Now, I personally think that the Tower of Babel had multi purposes that were given to it. One of which was to uh, probably open up some type of a stargate to the spiritual realm to these fallen angels that were there in the pre-flood days. I imagine his father Cush was telling him about the way the world was prior to the flood, and he was trying to bring that back, right? He's trying to open a doorway back so these angels, fallen angels, could come back in. Their son Tammuz, who was the heir apparent, was killed at some point as a young boy or a young man, supposedly by some type of a wild beast that killed him in the field. And instead of just giving him the normal burial and whatnot and letting him die, his mother uh, his mother turns him into a god that was to be worshipped as some kind of divine figure. And then, Semiramis is also associated with creating the first mother son cult. And it brings in this theme of motherhood, divinity, and rebirth. And then after her death, she herself was deified, or she deified herself before her death because she gave birth to this supposedly godson. And then the father as well, Nimrod, when he dies, he's incorporated into this pagan trinity of sorts, if you will. Now, somewhere along the way, she gained the title of the Queen of Heaven. And we note that that phrase "Queen of Heaven" is seen a couple places in the book, in the Bible, in the Old Testament. We see it in Jeremiah 7:18, and I'm quoting here. It says, "The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven, and they pour out drink offerings to her, to other gods, and that they may provoke me to anger." So God is angry at this. He's not liking this fact that his people, the Jewish people, were worshiping uh, the Queen of Heaven. The second passage is in Jeremiah 44:17 through 19. But we will certainly, in quoting here, but we will certainly do whatever has gone out of your own mouth to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven and to pour out drink offerings to her, as we have done, we and our fathers, and our kings and our princes in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of food, were well off, and saw no trouble. But since we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have lacked everything and have been consumed by the sword and by famine. And the women also said, when we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings to her, did we make cakes for her to worship her? Make cakes for her to worship her and pour out drink offerings to her without our husband's approval? And that was a question. Um, so we see here that Semiramis now has uh, been deified in this title of the Queen of Heaven. Now, this Queen of Heaven, whether we're talking about her or we're talking about Nimrod or Tammuz, although the names have changed, we still see the same people being passed down from one empire to the next, from one kingdom to the next, from one religion to the next. And there's probably, I don't know, I'm looking at probably 12 or 13 different mythologies that incorporate uh, Semiramis, Nimrod, and Tammuz. You have the ancient Mesopotamian kingdoms like the Akkadians, the Chaldeans, I'm blanking on the rest of these guys, the Syrians, the Babylonians. And the Babylonians existed before they conquered, before we see them in Daniel chapter 5. They were there. There was like a first iteration of the Babylonians back around the time of Moses, I believe. We see them there mostly in the Mesopotamian areas with the names of Semiramis and Tammuz. We also see them later on in Egyptian mythology with Isis and Horus. And the mother was Horus, the father was Osiris, and then Isis was the mother, the son was Horus, and then the father was Osiris. So you get the mother son dynamic. The son Horus is killed, and then his body parts are cut up into different places, and then I don't want to go into the whole spiel on that. And maybe we'll do that one day. I've done it before in the past, but we'll have to revisit it. In the Greek and Roman mythologies, you had the personages become Demeter and Persephone. Persephone. Demeter, or I don't know if I'm saying that right. Demeter or Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, and had a daughter, Persephone, who's abducted by Hades to the underworld. The sun, Tammuz, has been reflected through what's the guy with the wings on his feet? Mercury and Cupid, and I don't know all the different Roman gods, but that we can see the same names here reflected in Greek and Roman mythology. They changed cultures, they changed languages, but these gods just would be reinvented and recycled and put in the new mythologies for whichever kingdom was rising up. Obviously, in the biblical sense, we have the Queen of Heaven, and I don't know if she was always associated by the people in Judah and Israel back in the Old Testament times, if they knew her as Semiramis, or if they called her some other name that was local to one of their neighboring pagan kingdoms next to them. You have in Hinduism Parvati and Ganesha. You have another instance of them with Durga and Kartikeya. Again, Hinduism has, oh man, I don't know, thousands of different deities, so I'm sure this would be reiterated many times over. Um, in the Incan religion, you had Viracocha and Mama Kila. So Viracocha was the creator god. Mama Kia was the goddess of the moon. Their son Inti was the sun god, and central to Incan worship. If you know anything about the Incan culture, they were very bloody, barbaric culture that absolutely deserved to get wiped out by the Spanish. And I think the Spanish was a form of judgment. The conquistadors were a form of judgment, because God will use other nations, even if they're not, even if they're pagan or whatever. He will use them as a form of judgment against particularly vile cultures that have risen up. In Norse mythology, you have Frigg and Balder. You have in Japan Amaterasu and her children. So Amaterasu is the sun goddess. It's considered the mother of many deities, including her son, the storm god Sasunu. You have in the Native American religions, Mother Earth and the sun. And then you have modern paganism, the triple goddess and the horned god. And there is many names and titles that they're the same kind of trio: the mother, the father, the mother, and the son. So summarizing all that to say that, you get Nimrod, he would evolve into uh, Ahriman, or that would be Zoroastrian, or if you were in the Greeks, it might be Ninus. Semiramis became Ishtar, Astarte in the Babylonian and Phoenician cultures. Later, Sibyl in the Roman culture, and then Tammuz transformed into Adonis in the Greek, or Bacchus and Dionysus in the Roman Empire. Now, all that to say, with that kind of baggage, you would think, why would the Catholic Church ever want to be involved with anything like this? And so let me just touch on a little bit about what the Roman Catholic Church has done in terms of venerating Mary, who gave birth to Jesus in his first incarnation, and in his first advent, in his incarnation. And so we have Catholic theology sees Mary as the new Eve. Unlike the first Eve, she fully cooperated with God's plan for salvation, and that sets her up for an elevated role within Catholic doctrine, in what we would call, or what they would call, Mariology. And as time is borne on, she's taking on more and more of these divine aspects to her nature. Uh, the divine motherhood, her intercessory role, and then later on here we see her even being referred to as a co-redemptrix. So not only could Jesus save you, but Mary could save you as well. We see in the doctrine of the Assumption in 1950, and then the dogma of the Assumption was declared by Pope Pius XII, states that Mary was taken body and soul into heaven. This event solidified her status as, quote, the Queen of Heaven, reflecting her exalted position in heaven as the mother of the King of Kings. Now, the title Queen of Heaven was again formally attributed to her based on her role as the mother of Jesus Christ. And again, why would you give her a title that had been given to essentially the mother of harlots? I mean, Semiramis. If this all goes back to Semiramis, and she, because of what she did, she introduced this mother son cult to every culture that would follow them after Babel. And it makes sense that when God scattered the world there at Babel, and not only confused their languages, but also physically removed them from that area and moved people off to different parts of the world, they would take that with them. And that's why we see the same pattern rise up with the Incans or with the Indians in their Hindu religion, and with the Norsemen up in the northern Europe, all around the Mediterranean, as well as all throughout Mesopotamia. This very, very strong um, a need for there to be a father, a mother, and then the son in whatever their divine mythology was. And I struggle with why they would want to identify her as the Queen of Heaven, given all that kind of negative baggage that's been just laid out for you guys. And this is a very um, this is a very a lot of baggage to be thrown onto to Mary, who I'm sure does not appreciate any of this type of things. But think about the mother of harlots, right? Here in Revelation, she's identified as the mother of harlots. And the only system, the only belief system that can even kind of claim that title is this mother son cult belief, because we see it so dominant in so many different cultures, religions, and their mythologies, that really the only one that makes any kind of sense. So if anybody, I think most people would agree that even though we may not call the harlot church here in Revelation 17, we're not going to say, or we're all not going to be on the same sheet of music and say it's the Roman Catholic Church. Certainly the spirit behind that is the same. It's the same spirit that the Roman Catholic Church has uh, veered towards over the last 1,000 years. And inside of this belief, especially within the Roman Catholic Church, is this there's a couple of things going on with the Catholic Church that really got them off the rails and got them going down the wrong path, going all the way back to Augustine. So when Augustine, there in the fourth century, wrote his book, The City of God, he spent some time basically, I don't say denouncing, but dismissing the idea that the kingdom, that Christ would bring the kingdom back to the earth. So if you know anything about Augustine, he was a pagan before he converted to Christianity, but he had been influenced by a lot of pagan philosophy, Greek philosophy, a lot of different belief systems, but to include Gnosticism. And in Gnosticism, the spirit is good. You know, if I can boil it down into kind of a simple sentence, the spirit is good and the flesh is bad, right? So if it's spiritual, it's good, and if it's physical, it's bad. So Augustine really had a hard time believing that Christ would physically come back to this broken world. Now, this belief of we call it today amillennialism, um, was not new to Augustine. I mean, it had been going on for about 150 years by this point, but it wasn't really picked up by anybody. It was more of a fringe belief. And in 295 AD, there was a fragment from a document that was preserved, and it was spoken of by other church fathers, called the Schism of Nepos. And in the Schism of Nepos, Nepos is arguing against people dismissing the idea that Christ will physically return. Nepos believed that Christ would return and that we should believe Revelation 20 literally. that it's not a spiritual coming. He's going to physically return to the earth. But during the time of Nepos and thereafter, the idea that Christ wouldn't return to the earth was considered fringe. And so Augustine was the first guy to come along that was really had any kind of gravitas. He was a respected Christian teacher and thinker of his day. So when he embraced amillennialism, he really mainstreamed it and made it become, he normalized it within what would be the pre-Catholic Catholic system there. Now, as Catholicism begins to evolve into what it would become, so Catholic Church, Roman Catholicism gets its start in about the 3rd century. Once Constantine legalizes Christianity, really that whole century from the year 3, I think it's 312, all the way through the rest of the century, Catholicism begins to evolve. And so Constantine legalizes Christianity. The pagan temples and the pagan priests who were pagan now begins to convert to Christian or Christianity. And I'm not saying they're legitimate conversions. I'm just saying that temples would close down. The temple to Zeus would close down one day, and the next day would be a Christian church, and that pagan priest is now a Christian priest, right? And they would take these roles on, and they would also bring with them a lot of baggage. They would bring a lot of Catholic or a lot of pagan baggage with them, and that's how we get things like the kind of the fish hat that the Pope wears, and the title of Pontifex Maximus, making the sign of the cross, Ash Wednesday, a whole laundry list of things that they do today. That wasn't all developed all at the same time. These things came in stages. They were adopted over time, and these all have very pagan roots to them. And so we can see that instead of the church, as Jesus talks about in Matthew 13 in the mystery kingdom parables about the parable of the mustard seed, this small bush, really a mustard tree is very small. Now it grows into this gigantic tree, and then the birds of the air begin to nest into the tree. Well, if you take the birds in the context of Matthew 13, the birds are negative. They're a bad thing, because in the first parable that we see, the birds are the ones that are going out eating up the seeds that were thrown on the pathway and along the pathway, and the seeds were supposed to represent the gospel, and that it wasn't finding any fertile ground. So the birds come along, it's still sitting on the surface. They come and eat these things up. So now you got these birds nesting in what's supposed to be the church, right? This Christian church. And so in the context of Matthew 13, the birds are negative. They're not a good thing. So now that they're in the church, we can summarize that by saying, in Matthew 28, Jesus says to his disciples to take the gospel into the whole world, making disciples of all nations. And so instead of the gospel going out into the world, instead of the church going out into the world came into the church. And so by the 3rd century here, as amillennialism begins to gain prominence, Augustine writes his seminal book, The City of God, kind of codifying this belief system into normal mainstream 3rd, 4th century Christianity of that time. And so in that process there, if Christ is going to rule right now in heaven, and the church is still on the earth, and Jesus is never coming back, that would by extension necessitate the need for somebody on the earth to rule in Christ's stead. You would need God would need a man on the ground here on the earth to help rule over the church, to rule in Christ's place here on the earth. And that's what the role of the Bishop of Rome became, which we call the Pope, right? So one of the titles of the Pope is the Vicar of Christ. And so what that means is if he is ruling vicariously for Christ on the earth. And that title and that belief system allowed them to dominate Christendom for the next 1,000 years. And it wasn't up until the the 1500s when Martin Luther posted his 95 Thesis on the door of the church there in Wittenberg, and started what we know now as the Protestant Reformation. And so the Catholic Church had dominated Christendom, had dominated Europe. Anywhere there was supposedly Christian, uh, those places quickly came under the thumb and under the authority of the Pope in Rome. Even kings and queens and everybody else was beholden to them because of how powerful this belief that the Pope, when he sits on the throne in St. Peter's Basilica, he speaks ex cathedra. So what he says is directly from God, and to challenge that is to challenge God. That's how they believed back then. So all that to say is that the Catholic Church the Roman Catholic Church system became entwined with the earthly and physical kingdoms of the earth, like the secular human kingdoms. We see that from the time of Constantine up to the time through the Byzantines Empire, the Holy Roman Empire in the 800s. We see that later on with the control over the kings and the leaders of Europe as various nation states would rise up. And this all kind of had the same result. You had pockets of true believers everywhere, and you had some people within the Catholic system themselves that had no other alternative because there wasn't anything else. It wasn't like they could say, well, I don't want to go to Catholic church today. I don't want to go to mass. I'm going to go to the Baptist church down the street. There was no Baptist church down the street. In fact, most of people couldn't even read. So, illiteracy was incredibly high throughout Europe. But we see this merging and marrying of the religious system with the human secular governmental system. Now, at the time, they weren't secular per se. Um, they considered themselves to be, the things like the divine right of kings and whatnot. But it always had the same effects. Like they always begin to persecute true believers, and they persecuted the Jews. And we see that in the expulsions there from England in the 12th century, where they basically kicked all the Jews out of England, but they couldn't take their stuff with them. They had to leave their stuff behind. Same thing with Spain in the 15th century. In ultimately, we see that around that same time is when Christopher Columbus leaves and heads west with the three ships, and they discover the New World for the rest of Europe. Right? I think the Vikings had come over a few times, or in the 10th century, they got beaten up by the Indians. They left and never came back. But here, it's the first real kind of expansion into the New World was done by Columbus, and then subsequently by the Spanish, and then everybody else that followed them. But look at this partnership. Look at what this partnership has done when we take into consideration verses verse 6 here. It says, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of saints and with the blood of martyrs of Jesus, and when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. So we know throughout the Old Testament that the secular systems, not the secular systems, but the kings and the rulers, not just of Judea and Samaria, not just of Judea and Israel, but also the pagan nations that lived all around them, whether the Romans, the Visigoths, the Celts. I mean, wherever you want to go outside of the Roman Empire, Christianity was always targeted, and violence was perpetrated against Christians. And most of these pagan cultures had some type of mother-son cult system built into their belief systems. And they all came at odds against the true believers in Christ, which is why it resulted in the deaths of millions of Christians all throughout the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, um, really up through the time of probably about the 1700s. Even as Protestants came into power in certain places like Geneva, Switzerland, um, if you didn't believe exactly like Calvin and some of his folks, I mean, there was, I don't know how much violence was done by the Protestants, but not anywhere near what the Catholic Church has done. I mean, you got to think about the Inquisitions that the Catholic Church began doing in the, I want to say, the 12th century all the way up through I think the 1800s was when the Inquisitions finally came to an end, because they would go from country to country. And, according to Fox's Book of Martyrs and other places, more Christians were killed by the Catholic Church than by any other entity. Now, the Catholic Church is in like a Christian veneer of the mother-son cult that we see going back all the way to the time of Nimrod and Semiramis. So I got to believe that the mother of harlots has now manifested, and it has manifested for the last 1500 years inside of the Catholic system itself. And because the Catholic system teaches a works-based salvation, it deifies Mary. I would say for most of Catholic history, Mary may not have been viewed as a co-redemptrix, but she was definitely up there with God, part of not the Trinity, but she would be like the fourth part of the Trinity per se. But once you get to the time of the Inquisitions, that's when the Catholic Church really begins to crack down on all these other groups that were not following the Catholic script. Groups like the Lollards. There are many different groups that were persecuted and killed in droves in places like France and England and Germany and other places. So the Catholic Church has got a lot of blood on her hands in terms of who she's partnered with over time. We could see the millions of people that were killed during the Crusades, and I don't mean just Muslims, but I mean Jews and Christian, the pockets of Christian communities throughout the Roman or the Mediterranean there. If they were not bowing the knee to the Catholic Church, they were persecuted and killed, thrown in prison, had all of their stuff confiscated. How do you think the Catholic Church became the wealthiest organization on the planet? I mean, they're still the wealthiest organization on the planet. We could see them even as recently as the 20th century, the nefarious partnerships that they've had through various despots and dictators like the Third Reich. They knew full well what was going on with the Third Reich, and they still chose to partner with Adolf Hitler and his Nazis so that they can maintain their power. In fact, they would still gain a lot of wealth during this time period. And I'm going to quote here from Dave Hunt, who has a great book called A Woman Rides the Beast. Quote, monumental hypocrisy regarding the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church has been the greatest persecutor of both Jews and Christians the world has ever seen, and has martyred far more Christians than even pagan Rome or Islam has. He has been exceeded only by Mao and Stalin, but they hardly claim to be acting in Christ's name. Catholic Church has no rival among religious institutions in qualifying as a woman who is, quote, drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. So we can't lay the feet of all the martyrs, true believers. We can't lay them all at the feet of the Catholic Church prior to the advent of the Catholic Church. But certainly, when we look at the Catholic Church as being an extension of paganism with a Christian veneer, we can certainly trace the mother of harlots all the way back to Semiramis. Now, even today, you have the Catholic Church is in very close partnerships with United Nations, who has a very anti-Christ and anti-Semitic bent to it. We see that they have partnered with the World Economic Forum, or at least Pope Francis has as of late. And Pope Francis has been, to even many Catholics, he's been the most heretical pope that they've ever had, at least going back to about the 10th century. I want to quote here from Pope Francis, and this was this was in September 13th, 2024. And most of you will probably remember this, but I'm quoting him where he says, quote, all religions are paths to reach God. They are, to make a comparison, like different languages, different dialects to get there. But God is God for everyone. If you start to fight saying my religion is more important than yours, mine is, Pope Francis is kind of saying that we shouldn't fight because we're all paths lead to the same God. We're all going there. We're just speaking different dialects. you can see how problematic this was. Now, many of you have probably read A Woman Rides the Beast, and like me, at the time when you read it, you're just overwhelmed with how much facts Dave Huntz throws at you. I want to differentiate myself from Dave Hunt's position a little bit because where I think this goes is when the rapture happens, and this ties in with 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 with the apostasia. If you take the modern kind of interpretations today, you have a guy like Dr. Andy Woods on one hand that says that the apostasia is a physical departure, and he makes his case for that, and I don't disagree necessarily. And then you get a guy like Lee Brainerd who says no, the apostasia is a spiritual departure. I'm in the middle. I think that because of the physical departure of the rapture, what is left behind is the apostate system, because now there's no true Christians, and all you have left is all these religious structures, some of which claim to be Christian, but obviously they're still there, and that may include all of Roman Catholic, the structure of it, but for sure it absolutely includes leaving behind the architecture for the Roman Catholic system. Now, the Roman Catholic system is global. They have dioceses and churches in every country on the planet, to my knowledge, with the exception of just a couple. In places like they don't have them in North Korea, to my knowledge, or Afghanistan and Somalia and some of these other kind of failed states, but mostly they're mostly everywhere else in the world. I can't think of a country where they're a country that's functioning that's not completely run by some type of a despot. There are Catholic churches there and have been for centuries. So I think if for nothing else, at the rapture of the church, what happens, it results in the apostasia. So it is both a physical departure. The apostasy is a physical departure in how how it is in a action word or a verb. It is the leaving, but what that results in is the apostasia. So they're kind of six of one way, half dozen of the other. One causes the other, but they're connected to each other, and that's why I think Paul uses that word. And so I don't think Andy Woods is wrong, and I don't think Lee Brainerd's wrong. I think they're both right. I just think that they're both, one causes the other, if that makes sense to you guys. Now, let me keep reading. Verse 7, but the angel said to me, why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and the 10 horns. So I want to deal with this idea of mystery, because a lot of people think that her title is Mystery Babylon, but it's not the title. It is a mystery, but the mystery is not the title. Think back to Old Testament times. Let's say you're in the silent years, or the so-called silent years, from when Daniel. So after Daniel, right after the Persians take over the Babylonians, right? We're working our way down the multi-metallic statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream, and that Daniel explains and gives him the interpretation to. Let's say you're a Jew living at that time. A Messiah is coming, but when you look through the Old Testament, you get kind of two perspectives of the Messiah. Is he coming like the suffering servant that we see in Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22 and other places? Or is he coming as the conquering king in places that we see, like in Isaiah 11 and in Zechariah 14? And so for most, I don't want to say most, but a lot of Jews at that time, they really struggled because they're thinking that the Messiah was two different people. So you had a Messiah ben David and a Messiah ben Joseph. The Messiah ben Joseph being the suffering servant, and then Messiah ben David being the conquering king, or somebody like him, a human like that. The fact that God would come down in the flesh, and what we call the incarnation, and take on a human body, that was the mystery, right? That was they hadn't. I don't know that they could have wrapped their minds around that and really understood that um, in the way that we understand it today. For them, it was this was a big this is a big mystery. I think that this system is going to be something akin to that, and let me explain it because it's a mystery to us right now because it hasn't happened yet, and we're seeing these different forms and facets of the beast kingdom. Even I wrestle with this because when I read about the rider on the white horse in Revelation 6:1 and 2, are we talking about the person, the man, the Antichrist that rides? Because it doesn't seem like the other riders are individual people. They seem to be representing like a spirit of something that takes peace from the earth or brings in great famine and and economic hardship and so on, death and hell riding behind the pale horse. So those don't seem like human individuals. So I always wrestled with, okay, is the rider on the white horse, is that the beast system from which out of the Antichrist will come out of? The little horn that pops out of the other 10 horns, right? That to me is the mystery, right? Because I don't know how that's going to play out yet. None of us know how that's going to play out until it actually plays out. But that's kind of what I'm talking about here when we talk about Babylon, mystery Babylon, that she's going to take on a form that's familiar yet not familiar. And so when John marvels at her, he's like, first of all, it's got to be something that he's familiar with, and yet it's something is off with it, or something is different about it that doesn't make any sense. So the way I look at this particular wording around mystery is that he is going to see in this future vision or this future he's being shown these things like what I showed you in the diagram before. He's going to see it and it's going to make sense but not make sense, right? So he sees in Revelation 13 this beast that rises out of the ocean there, the sea, and it represents this global system, global governmental system, right? But then he sees that the order of the animals that come out, they're reversed from how Daniel gets them. So Daniel gets the lion, the bear, the leopard, and then the terrifying monster. Well, then John sees it kind of in reverse. He sees the terrifying monster. It's got a mouth like a head like a lion, feet like a bear, and then it's got the leopard skin, right? Or the leopard coat. And so it's the same animals, it's just the order that they're given in are different. So when Daniel sees it, this is still future to him. So he's looking at it from like it was future. And then John is, even though this is future to him, it seems like he's looking at it kind of in reverse, how they come out. And we struggle with this because we don't know exactly how it's going to be. Just like the mark of the beast, right? We know that um, we're not like in generations past where we can't even really conceive of how the mark will come. Most people just assumed it was some kind of a tattoo or writing on your hand or something. But nowadays, the struggle that we have is not that we can't envision the mark of the beast coming. There's just so many different ways it can come now because the technology has advanced so quickly that we don't know exactly what form the mark will take. So now we have too many options, whereas before they were limited by the technology of their day. They hadn't even no way to really wrap their minds around it. So either way, it's a mystery. It's a mystery for those who came before us, who didn't have that technology, and they were limited by what I call the tyranny of the present. And then you have us today, where there's so many different options. We have no idea. There's no way to specify which form it will actually take until it actually takes a form. Speaking of the mark itself. So I think John here is seeing the Roman Empire because we know in Daniel 9 that this Antichrist, when he comes, he's got to come from out of the old Roman Empire. We don't know where out of the old Roman Empire, but we just know that it's somewhere within the old boundaries of the old Roman Empire, which could be anywhere from North Africa all the way to Jordan and Israel and maybe the very western parts of Parthia, all the way up through Turkey, Greece, Italy, Europe. Most of mainland Europe up into half of England. So we don't know exactly where this Antichrist figure will come from specifically. We just know it's from that old system. But John's seeing this, but then he's seeing what makes it different and what makes it odd, because John in 95 AD, Rome is pagan. I mean, they had all kinds of gods. They had Zeus, Jupiter, Mars, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, I was blanking on the women goddesses. I can't think of any of them off the top of my head. Got Chooch in the house. What's up, brother Chooch? Um, so the way I kind of envision this being is that in John's day, Rome was pagan. It was a pagan empire with many gods, but now he's seeing the Roman Empire, but it's got this kind of veneer of Christianity, yet it's not Christian. So he's looking at it. It's somewhat familiar, but it's not. It's kind of like if he'd been transported to some kind of alternate reality where his world, the world that he's looking at, is kind of similar to ours, but not the same, right? So he's seeing this Roman Empire, but now it's got this veneer of Christianity, but it's not Christian at all. So it's perplexing to him, I think. He's looking at it like, man, well, this is kind of weird. Um, says here, I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. So the part I'm going to go into here, I want to talk specifically about the heads and the horns, and this is where it gets a little complicated. So let me just bear with me as we go through this. Okay, so this is a way of looking at it. It is not the way or the only way to look at it. This is simply a way I tried to break this out to make it make sense to me. So if you start in the numbers, it goes from like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So let's read through the boxes, and then that will explain kind of the section of the chart it's on. The 7 heads are 7 authorities, but also seem to indicate they rule from a particular geographic location, where also the woman, the harlot, has her power. And that could be anywhere from Rome or some kind of newly rebuilt Babylon. We don't know. We don't know where this final city is going to be. And remember, we talked about yesterday or not yesterday, but we talked about Friday during the bowl judgments. When the earth superheats during the bowl judgments, I think it's the fourth bowl judgment, when the sun, the angel pours the bowl of wrath is poured out on the sun gets super hot, and men are scorched. When we talked about how that would melt the polar ice caps, and that the polar ice caps would cause the flooding, all around every coastline in the world would be flooded by miles and miles, and that would be the new, beachfront property. If you remember back in, I don't know what year Superman came out, the first Superman with Christopher Reeve. Gene Hackman played Lex Luthor, and he had that goal in there to buy all this land that was out in the middle of the desert in California on the West Coast that was like basically worthless. And then he was going to use one of those like nuclear missiles, or one of those I don't know I can't remember the missile, but he was gonna hit the fault line there in California and trigger an earthquake that would cause half of California to fall off into the ocean. And now Lex would have the beach. He would control all of the beachfront property. Well, in the fourth trumpet judgment, the sun, I'm just going to call it a supernova. I don't know if that's what it is, but it's going to kind of act like a supernova for a while there. It's all supernatural anyways, right? So God is causing the sun to expand into heat, causes the polar ice caps to melt, causes all the oceans to rise, and now what used to be beachfront is 20 miles underwater. So the struggle I have with Rome is that from what I remember of Rome, and I'd have to go back and look at a map on it, but it sits kind of close to the water. In fact, let me look at that, because I don't know how close it was to the beach. I went there back in the 90s. I don't remember much about my time there, except for, let's see. Oh wow. Is it 10 miles? Let's look at my map now. It's gonna drive me crazy. Let's see, Rome, Italy. All right. So you can see Rome is pretty close to the ocean there, and I imagine by the time the bowl judgments happen, that most of Rome will be underwater, and this may be part of that judgment too. But the seven heads are these in what's called here in 17, Revelation 17, the seven mountains, seven seats of power. Rome was called the city on seven hills. A lot of other cities have been called that as well, though. But given the constraints that we have, that the Antichrist has to come out of the old Roman Empire, the mother of harlots, the tie-in with the Catholic Church borrowing so much that it has from pagan mythology and pagan belief systems with the mother-son cult and um, deifying Mary as a code redemptrix and all of that. It seems to me that Rome is the location um, of this final Babylon. Now, again, they could start breaking ground on some new place tomorrow, and that could be the Babylon. We don't know, but based on what we have, the information we have at hand, it seems like the most likely place to be. Now, number two, before before and as the seals are opened, the beast government forms, and I put in here quotes, offices, in order of precedence to deal with the crisis beginning with the rapture, and in order also to control the narrative of what happened. Now, the reason I put these down as czars is because we've seen this position rise up here as of late here at least the United States. And I don't mean czar like the Russian czar, like Tsar Nicholas or anybody like that, like a king or emperor. A czar in the terms of like a border czar, it's a semi-official title where you're given control or authority over a particular category or section of modern civilization. So I have in here these offices. You have the political, you have the tech czar, the military czar, the economic czar, the health czar, agriculture czar, and religious czar. Again, I'm not saying this is what it's going to be specifically. This is just a way to look at it. So we have these czars. They don't have, they're not kings in the traditional sense, but they do have a lot of power and they have power over particular areas. They are what would become like if you had the president, his cabinet picks, or if you were a commander in a military structure, they would be your staff. They would be put in charge of particular things, and they are the ones that are going to help govern these things, right? So if the United States collapses at the rapture, and in the collapse of the United States triggers a global collapse economically, which causes all sorts of chaos and stuff to happen, I can see guys like um, Elon Musk and George Soros and these other guys that are insanely wealthy. Maybe not George Soros because I think he'll probably die. I don't mean to sound morbid, but I think that he'll probably pass in 2025. But his son, Alex Soros, these guys that have an insane amount of money and they have an insane amount of influence could use that to gain a position of authority in some kind of like uh, I don't even know if it would be some kind of a quasi government alliance at that time, but people are going to want to it's going to get chaotic, and then in that chaos and that lawlessness, people are going to want some kind of return they're going to want some kind of a return to normalcy, and they're going to want law and order to come back. They're going to want people to come pick up their trash and bring back some kind of semblance of civilization. So you may have an organization like the World Economic Forum or some other group that steps up and says, "Hey, I know all the governments are in chaos right now. Let's put this group together, and we can start trying to get a handle on all the craziness in the world." Now, under these czars, they may appoint regional directors or regional leaders um, that physically control a territory. Now, the ones above control specific areas of life in the world, like agriculture czar. So, if you're the agriculture czar in this scenario, um, your office, wherever you're based out of, right there, y'all may be working together. You're reaching out to kings and to presidents and to leaders and saying, "Hey, what can you do to get your food production back under control?" Or where do we have all the world's food stored at? There's food banks all over the world, seed banks, and all sorts of stuff. They may be trying to get a handle on this stuff, but they may appoint sub commanders or people right underneath them to actually be their person on the ground in that particular location. So that person on the ground is now the sub commander or kind of a subordinate leader underneath the czars per se. Now, I put under the on the top on the seven heads. I put the four horsemen there as a placeholder. I don't know if that's how they come out, but it seems like the first thing that would need to come out is to be some kind of a leader that can get control, or at least be charismatic enough and influent enough to be able to get other leaders and other people to start following him, and not only to start following him, but to believe in the narrative that he's selling. And he can't do that without modern technology these days. So in order to control the whole world and to make sure that you've got things going in a particular direction, you're going to need the ability to mass communicate, and you're going to need the ability to make sure that people see you around the world and they see you as the kind of the guy that's stepping up, almost in a Trump-like way. And I'm looking at Trump, and look at how the world looks at him today. How many countries around the world, when he won, were super, uh, I mean, super excited that he won. You had people doing these pro-Trump rallies and parades in places like Japan, in Israel, other places. The UK had these massive rallies that were showing support for Trump. It's I'm not saying Trump is the Antichrist. I'm saying that his global reach will be like that, but even greater, because now the world's really, really in chaos, and the world is looking for a leader to step up. So I kind of just envisioned these seven heads as these seven mountains, in much the same way that the NAR looks at their seven mountain mandate. They're looking at the seven mountains of society, or the world, entertainment, education, etc. Except these seven mountains are like, what does the world need to run, and how can we control that? So some of these guys, I mean, these guys won't be appointed to those positions. They may be self-appointed, or they may be appointed by uh, the political leaders, because these guys have the means and the ability to make things happen. Much in the same way that when the Hurricane Helene hit North Carolina, one of Trump tapped Elon Musk right away, and he said, "Hey, can you get these Starlinks over there so people can get back online to start rebuilding?" And again, I don't think Trump and Musk are that. I'm simply using them as examples of what I think it's going to look like going forward, because I do believe that the rapture is going to cause a lot of chaos and destruction. I believe that follows almost verbatim, as we see there in 1 Thessalonians 5, when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction comes, etc. And I think that that's what happens after the rapture. The world becomes very chaotic, and they're looking for somebody to lead them out of this craziness and this chaos and lawlessness and anarchy and all the other things. Because the minute that things start to go wonky, I mean, right after the rapture, things go crazy. Every criminal organization, every gang, every cartel, every mafia, every terrorist group, everybody's going to be trying to take advantage of this, and it's going to cause a lot of death and chaos. And so the governments are going to struggle to regain control over one. They got to get control over the narrative, and then they got to get control over the resources, the mass communication, and the resources. So I think I laid that out in a kind of a pragmatic way. And once they do get some kind of control, they then begin to appoint people to certain regions in the world to help them solidify that control. So there, number three, certain offices work together. For example, the tech and economic and religious czars can work to start creating some kind of a biometric currency, because now fiat currencies are going to be completely upended with the collapse of the US dollar. Whether we like it or not, the US dollar is still the Federal Reserve currency of the world. So as the dollar tanks because the US is in disarray, um, they're going to need some type of a system that people can buy and sell from. And I think those three SARs together would work pretty hand in glove to start working together to make that happen. Especially if the technology is already there. It's just a matter of convincing people to take it and convincing people to get on board with the system. Now, if you think about the 10 regions, the world right now, the United States military has the world broken up into uh, 7 regions or 8 regions if you include space, and then it has these functional areas. So, uh, in the army, these areas would be like, for example, like North America would be a region. We call that Northcom or Northern Command. South America, Central America is called Southern Command. Pacific Command is basically all of the Pacific plus the Indonesian area, or they call the Indo-Pacific. You have EUCOM, so the European Command. Central Command is all of the Middle East. AFRICOM is the African Command. So we have 7 regions there, plus space, because we have so many assets and things in space now, satellites and all sorts of stuff there now. The last few things that they have, and these are still commands, but they're functional areas like the cyber domain falls under its own functional command. And because of how interconnected everything is today with the internet, from the military's perspective, we need to be able to operate in that domain, and not only operate in it, but to dominate in the cyber world, so that if an enemy comes against us with some kind of a cyber attack, we can hit them back right away with a cyber attack, as also protecting ourselves in that process. So I think these regions could align very easily in the world today. Now, some of these places are very big, so you would need two. For example, like North America, if the current structure of the U.S. government is collapsed, basically that means that the states are kind of on their own, and so whatever the state resources are still available after the rapture will be in varying states of disarray. But you may have somebody, a regional leader, like on the West Coast, and you may have one on the East Coast. Same thing with like Russia. You got this massive country with these huge borders. They may put a couple of different people in different countries because of the size of them. But again, this is just a theory. It's just a working theory. That's all this is. Number 4. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, so swift like ancient Greece. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth. I had that completely backwards earlier. uh, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. So we see in Daniel, the lion comes first, then the bear, then the leopard. And now John here has shown this, and it's in reverse, where you got the leopard, the bear, the leopard, the bear, and then the lion, and they form this terrifying beast, right? So it's a hybrid, and that's why it's not given any specific description other than it's terrifying, other than it has iron teeth and that it tramples everything, right? It's once you start mixing all these animals into it together, it's hard to call it any one thing. Number 5, um, the little horn subdues or conquers 3 kings and then takes over the rest by having the majority. He then ascends to the title of the King of Kings and ascends as the 8th horn. So in the out of the 10, he would be the 11th. The kings there are below there. So he subdues 3 of the kings, and then he ascends up to become the eighth of the seven, taking over the seven. But he could be number one. He could be the political leader that also kind of dual hats as a king and then subdues three. There's any number of ways this could play out. But the important thing here is that he's going to be able to come and rise up from amongst his peers, and he is going to stand head and shoulders above the rest of these guys. So he is going to have the power, the influence, the charisma. And if I remember correctly, in I think in the Left Behind books, he spoke every language, if I'm remembering correctly. So he has the ability. He's a polyglot. He speaks all these different languages. He's probably going to be infused with some kind of artificial intelligence. So his IQ is going to be off the chart, like 400 IQ, um, in control of an immense amount of wealth and probably weapons of war. Um, but the main thing about these kings down here is that they are all of one mind. They all are share the same vision for where they want to take the world, and they're looking forward to carving up the world so that they can rule it. Now, number 6, the 10 kings are the 10 toes of Daniel 2. They co-rule the regions of the world in thinking they are sharing power, but they're not. The Antichrist rises as an 11th horn or the little horn and could be from the region that he hails from. He could hail from, like, let's say he hails from Italy or Greece or somewhere like that, or Syria or some other place, but he's going to rise from out of the horns and ascend up to be one of the seven, or he's going to be the eighth now. And he ascends to the highest office as some kind of a global emperor, much in the same way that Charlemagne, when they kickstarted the Holy Roman Empire, was later given the title of emperor. And then number 7, the beast, the system that was and is not, is his himself now personifies, the Antichrist personifies the beast system, is also the eighth, and is of the seven heads, and is going to perdition, meaning he is going to straight to the lake of fire. At his resurrection, he becomes Satan incarnate, who will at the end be cast into the bottomless pit. Satan is cast into the bottomless pit, but will ascend out of the millennial kingdom for a short season. Think about what I just said. Who comes from out of the abyss? We have two names. One is the Abaddon, which is the leader of those demonic locusts that we see in Revelation 8. And I don't think that that's who this guy is. But the beast is cast into the abyss. But we also know that he comes out at the end of the millennial kingdom and deceives the nations for a season, a short season. We aren't told how long that season is, but if we're going to be consistent, any kind of consistent, we see in Revelation 3:10 that we the church are going to be kept from the hour of trial, or the hour of temptation that comes upon the whole world, the testing. If the hour can be representing 7 years, then I don't know what a season represents. More than 7 years, but somewhere in that time frame. So again, this is an alternative view. Sometimes if you go with let me see if I can pull this up. All right. Share screen. I think this is somewhat based on like Gary Stearman's view of the horns, heads, and crowns. So he would look at the 7 horns, and then the eighth being like the last iteration with the Antichrist. But the 7 horns were the 7 stages of Rome. And then you look at like the first stage, 753 to 510. Obviously, Rome existed for a long time. It existed long before it became an empire. It existed as the Tarquins, the counselors, the dictators, the republicans, the triumvirate, and then finally, in its last stage, became imperial, meaning they had a Caesar put in charge of them as the king, and he had total absolute authority over everything. And he becomes this guy that rises up at the end will take on that same title as the Emperor of Rome, much in the same way that Charlemagne back in 800 took on that title as emperor. Even Napoleon took on the title of emperor, and even Hitler, right? Hitler was the Führer of the Kaiser of the Third Reich, and the Reich meaning this um, this iteration, the third iteration of the Holy Roman Empire. So they considered themselves the last stage of the Holy Roman Empire. So I don't know. I mean, I like Gary Stearman's position on this as well. So the seven refers to the head and eight refers to the horns, but the head wears the crown, right? So it could be this way as well. I mean, we really don't know. Like I said, we're not going to really know until it happens. And by the time that this stuff happens, we aren't going to be here. But it's interesting to look at seeing how the world could come about either through any one of these ways or some variation or combination of them altogether too. So the eighth, what we see, the revived Roman Empire, that could be considered the eighth. It's brought back from out of antiquity, and I long believe that the European Union, as it currently sits, is not going to stay in the same structure as it will be during the time of the Beast Kingdom, because right now they're a giant bureaucracy, and nobody gets excited about bureaucrats. Nobody gets excited about bureaucracies. But if after the rapture they're able to market or rebrand themselves as the new Roman Empire based off of the boundaries of the old Roman Empire plus the current constructs of like the EU, NATO, and the Union for the Mediterranean, any one of those combinations would give them basically the old Roman Empire again. And if they take on the mantra of the boundaries of the old Roman Empire in this restructuring, right, this global restructuring that happens, uh, it stands to reason they might bring on somebody like a super president over all of these territories, and then he goes on to kind of rebrand himself like Charlemagne did and call himself an emperor. So then that would be uh, the eighth iteration of Rome, because Rome's never really gone away. It's just kind of morphed into different structures since the Roman Empire collapsed, or at least since the western leg of the Roman Empire collapsed, and morphed itself in such a way that it never really lost power, but how its power was structured uh, changed over time. And so, much in the same way that the mother son cult keeps reinventing itself through each iteration of a successive empire. If you're the Egyptian empire and you've got Osiris, Isis, and Horus, let's say by the time the Egyptian empire starts to fall apart, that same trio gets picked up by the Greeks, who become the new power, or the Persians or whoever, and they just take those same gods and then give them new names, but they're basically the same gods. That's the same structure with Rome. It's never really gone away. It just changes over time, but it's still the same essence of the same power structure. Like the legs of the statue, they go down. They're both Rome. The ankles are Rome, the feet are Rome, the toes are Rome, but there's changes into how they are structured. They're not the same kind of structure, but they're still all Roman. Now, again, this is another way to look at it too. So I'm not going to say that my way is correct and everybody else is wrong, even though I joked about that earlier on Tom's show. Honestly, I try to keep an open mind about this stuff, and hopefully you guys will too, and just kind of take these things into consideration and be like, okay, that's interesting to think about. How are we seeing that manifest today? Well, we're seeing that manifest today with this huge push for globalism. So right now you have basically two different power structures in the world. You've got nationalist and you've got globalist. And the nationalist, you have like the United States under like a Trump. You have China, they're nationalist. They believe in the preeminence of China. In Russia, they believe in the preeminence of Russia. They don't want to come under the thumb of any type of global system, especially like a woke, politically correct, system like the West is trying to embrace right now. But all that to say, we can see it forming now. We can see the infrastructure being built now for the technology, for the all the international treaties, all the international organizations that are cropping up that are seemingly having authority over people in places where they weren't elected to be put in charge of. Some entity rises up and said, "Hey, we're going to do the Great Reset," like Klaus Schwab in the World Economic Forum, and we're going to aim for 2030. So they get all of these world leaders to start buying into their ideology. And so all these world leaders are coming in, they're drinking the Kool-Aid. They're like, yeah, this is great. This is going to be awesome. We're going to own nothing and be happy about it. Or they're not. They're going to be rich, wealthy, elite, and they got a seat at the table. The rest of us are going to be like serfs, we won't own anything. We're just going to be barely surviving. That's kind of how they want it. They want all the goods for themselves, and everybody else is just, we're just a means to an end. So it could be like that. We see the structure going that way now. There's a great desire to create a world crisis that pushes everybody into one system. They've used Charlie Oscar Victor 19 Delta. They've used the War on Terror. They're using right now, and they're still using all of the push for environmental uh, insanity, that stuff that's going on, pushing the climate crisis to get nations to give over their authority to some kind of international body. And that international body will ultimately end up taking control over all these other nations. That's their goal. Um, and that's why the big push and the big fight is today, because Trump doesn't want to go under that. The normal Americans, the majority of Americans don't want to go under that. In fact, people that live in Canada and the UK are finding out right now they don't want to be under that either. It's a scary place to be when your government can arrest you for just anything. Um, and you're working more and more to make less and less, to the point you can't own things. You're basically just renting things from now on. Technically, we just rent everything anyways, because we have like property taxes and things. And if you don't pay your property taxes, it doesn't matter if you own that house outright or you own the property outright. The government's going to come in and take it because you haven't paid your taxes. So all that to say, we're seeing that being formed now, and then we're also seeing the technology racing. I mean, the technology is just racing ahead, and it is quickly we're quickly making a system that is going to be impossible to escape from. And I don't remember. I saw it yesterday. I think I was watching some kind of news clip on the use of drones. The Chinese are using them to do all sorts, and they have like probably three, four, 500 drones that they're all flying together perfectly in sync. Nobody's specifically controlling them. I think they were already programmed to go to specific designs. But we've seen that in a lot of New Year's Eve shows. The Koreans have used them. Other countries have used these massive like drone displays. Just imagine that level. We look at that, what the Koreans did with all the designs they did in New Year's Eve, and how it looked awesome how they did it. It's also terrifying given the fact that if they can do that, some government can also get them to be weapons of war and weaponize those things, and it would be terrifying. uh, can you imagine a swarm of like drones like this, yay big, that have explosive charges in them or whatever else in them, that just can target individuals, and they'll hunt you down until they get you. I mean, there's no way to really hide from those things. So Britt Gillette has talked a lot about drone technology. He's really more the expert on that than I am. So I default to Britt on any drone questions you might have. But he's got his books that he's written about the rise of swarm technology, and I know that he's had a lot of programs as of late on swarm technology. But the use of drones is terrifying, in my opinion. All right, let's see. I think I am. I don't know if I have any more presentations to show. Let me close this out. All right. So this is a way to look at it. I'm not saying that this is it specifically, and I don't think any one teacher worth their salt is going to say that they know exactly how it's going to play out. There's a lot of hard things to read in here, especially about the beast that ascends out of the pit. And the only thing that makes sense to me is that the Antichrist is possessed by Satan at the midpoint, and the beast, the Antichrist, or the Satan is part of that satanic trinity. You know, you've got the Father, the Satan playing the role of the Father, the Antichrist playing the role of the Son, and then you have the false prophet who is not. I don't think at first. I don't think he's religious at first. I think he's more tech guy at first, and um, by the midpoint of the tribulation, the midpoint here, um, he ends up taking over when the world gets ready to overthrow the harlot and burn her with fire. He then begins to direct people to worship this man, the Antichrist. And so then he takes on that religious point at that point and begins to drive people in that direction. I don't think the false prophet is going to be in charge of the harlot if the harlot is going to be something that all the kings and everybody hates. So let's talk about the harlot real quick. Let's see. So the 10 horns which you saw are the 10 kings who have not received have received no kingdom as of yet, but receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. I hate using Musk as an example because I don't want to smear the guy. I don't necessarily trust him, but at the same time, I'm not going to say he's the false prophet or anything like that. But what I will say is that we can see shades of it. We can see kind of an example if you have eyes to see and ears to hear of how influential somebody like Musk has become, yet he holds no political office. Now he is going to be given this made up office called Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, him and Vivek Ramaswamy. And it's something that we desperately need. And it maybe this is the only way that we can really get it done is through some kind of a commission that's not elected to go in and root out all of the fraud, waste, and abuse inside of this bloated bureaucracy we're in now. And that's the way it's going to be. It's going to serve a pragmatic purpose, and everybody's going to need it. But from that position, you could see if those 7 mountains there are some type of czars over particular areas of the world's production or technology or religion or whatever the case is. You can kind of see how somebody of influence could rise up in each of those positions, like cabinet positions, as it were. Now, verse 14, these will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. Then John is referring back to this angel that was having one of the bulls of wrath and is now showing him all these things. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, and eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. Now, it says they hate the harlot. So think about it this way. When the rapture happens, all true believers are going to be removed from the planet. So the first time in human history, there will be no true believers in God left on the earth. The earth will be completely devoid. If not for just a few minutes, there will be no true believers left on the earth. Now we know that there will be a great harvest, a soul harvest that happens because of the rapture. And like I said before in chapter 7, I think there's these two great periods of time where there's great purging. There's a purging by the harlot against people that convert to Christ after the rapture, these tribulation saints, and the harlot's trying to get all of her power together, get all of her system in place She's not going to want competition from believers who tribulation saints who figure out that Christ is the only way. And so I think that the harlot purges the tribulation saints, and then the second great purging is going to be where the beast system, those who don't take the mark of the beast, they're going to be purged as well, killed. Thank you, Sal Ribera. Thank you, thank you. Appreciate that. So that is the two purgings. One's by the harlot, one's by the beast system itself, by the false prophet. The reason they hate her, we can see that today as well. If you look at the Democrats today, everybody's turning on everybody because Kamala Harris lost by such a great margin. Well, the Democrats are mad at the liberal media because they were lied to for years and years and completely gaslit over this idea that Trump could win again. But yet he won. He won by overwhelming majority. So they know they've been lied to, so they hate it. So they're turning on them. You see liberal, progressive, leftist pundits turning on each other because they got all their predictions wrong, and now the smart liberals or the smart progressives have quickly begun to bend the knee to Trump and go into Mar-a-Lago and kiss the ring, so to speak. The rest of them are just fuming. They're angry. They're beside themselves. We've got women shaving their heads, threatening to divorce their husband. I mean, all sorts of craziness is going on. Multiply that by like 1,000,000, and that's what it's going to be like when the people are ready to turn on the harlot. Now, if the harlot is the Catholic system, obviously it's not going to be in the exact same configuration that we see today, because the there won't be any true believers left inside of the Catholic system. There won't be any true believers left on the planet anywhere. So they're not going to be guided by the Holy Spirit. They're going to be guided by the devil and these lying demons and fallen angels and all these other entities that are going to be uh, great, promoting great deception like the world's never seen. Now, oh, I forgot one thing. It is possible too that some of these kings, namely the Antichrist, they could be a one of these fallen angels. And I believe there's a difference between the demons and angels or fallen angels. Demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim that were wiped out during the flood, and also ever since then, being neither fully human or fully angel, they are kind of left bodiless, and that's why they're always looking to possess things or possess people. Fallen angels don't need to possess people because they can manifest into human form anytime they want. So it may be that some of those kings or some of those leaders in this configuration here are fallen angels that are manifesting into human form, and that's how they're able to amass power very quickly because they know where all the bodies are buried. They know where all the treasures are buried. They know how to get into everything. They know how to uh, secure the nuclear warheads and turn them on and point them at their enemies. I mean, they're going to have that ability to function and operate. So it could be that some of those kings are fallen angels in and of themselves, either possessing humans or manifesting in the flesh as humans, pretending to be humans. And that is a possibility why the false prophet and the Antichrist are cast straight into the lake of fire, because they're not human necessarily. They may be a hybrid, a mix between a human and something else. But again, we don't know. We just go from here. We just go way off into speculation territory. So I'll just leave that at that. I'm just throwing that out there too, that some of these folks on this chart could be fallen angels. Now, they hate the harlot, and if she is anything like uh, modern leftist, progressive, Marxist craziness, whatever, um, people will only tolerate that liberal lunacy for a while, but they will, like what we've seen here recently, they begin to push so far left, they are operating outside of the bounds of reality and common sense.
And if anything, Satan is going to be operating in this time period for himself. He's going to be operating under a very pragmatic reasons, because he only has 7 years. He does not have time to spending 20 years deceiving a generation. He's got to get everything done very quickly. So he needs to be able to, he needs confident men and women to help build this and to take control of this beast kingdom. So, when Ketanji Jackson Brown, I think is her name, is the Supreme Court judge, when she was going before her nomination and she could not give a definition of what a woman is, that's what I'm talking about. That level of lunacy, or believing, everything the left believes today. Uh, Satan doesn't need that. He does that now because it creates division. It leads people to hell. It's a good effective tool now, but he's only got a handful of years to get stuff done. These guys that are ruling here, men or women or whoever they are going to be incredibly competent people, incredibly savvy, incredibly ruthless in how they take control. They are not going to be these nimby pimby, uh, uh, you know, I don't want to offend anybody by mentioning any kind of clothes. How certain liberals dress today. He's not going to be like that. They're going to be competent. They're going to be ruthless, um, and they're going to know what they're doing, and they're going to take control very quickly. So I think they're going to see at some point the harlot is a waste of time. It's dividing their efforts, and they're all going to say, you know what, we need to get rid of her or get rid of this system. And that system may be based in Rome. It may be based out of the Vatican. We don't know. Could be based out of that Abrahamic house in, I think it's in Abu Dhabi or wherever it was built. We don't know exactly where that's going to take place yet, but they're not going to need her, they're not going to need this harlot system that is ecumenical, that embraces everything all together, for a number of different reasons. One is that it'll be useful for a season, but then they're not going to need it after that. They'll be done with it, because they're going to want to direct all the worship to Antichrist, the man of sin, the man of lawless, and they're going to want to direct all that worship to him, because they know where they need to take this, and this is where they're going to start mandating the mark of the beast. So once Gog Magog happens, it is my belief that militant Islam, is going to be dead as a doornail. All of those, if in Gog and Magog, let's say the rapture happens, there's a gap in time of a year, maybe 2 years, if whatever the case is, you have Russia, Turkey, Iran march against Israel, plus all of the forces that come out of the south. You're going to have like the reverse crusades, except Christians are not going to be marching on Jerusalem. Now it's going to be Muslims, and not just any Muslims. These are going to be the young military age males that are fired up and ready to become martyrs and kill and wipe out Israel. That's going to be like what we're seeing today in the world with the anti-Semitism, like that, but on steroids. I mean, it's going to be insane, the level of hatred that they have toward Israel. And when the U.S. is no longer in the equation, or we're over here suffering because the rapture, kneecapped us as a country, and we can't even help ourselves, let alone help anybody else, they're going to look at that as the opportune time to take out Israel once and for all. And so they're going to march on Israel. They're going to come from Europe. They're going to come from Chechnya. They're going to come from all the Stan nations, all the former Soviet satellite states, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, all of those. You can't even imagine how big this mass of people are going to be marching against Israel. And I think Israel sees them coming. There's not anything they can do about them. It's so overwhelming, and it's going to seem absolutely hopeless. And the only option that they're going to feel like they have is the Samson option, which is they're going to, I don't know, I think that means they drop a nuke on themselves or something and takes out all their enemies as well. And they may be prepared to do that at some point, but that's where God intervenes and supernaturally wipes out all of these armies. And that's it for militant Islam. I mean, as far as, there will still be Muslims, I think, but they're not going to be anywhere like they are today. It's going to be very ready to be absorbed into whatever this global religion is right after the rapture. And so I think militant Islam, you had true born again believers who are now removed at the rapture, although that will create a new level of soul harvest, right? But The other group that is that won't bend the knee to this religious harlot is largely going to be the faithful believers there, and whether they are Orthodox or ultra Orthodox or even um, 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 practicing Jews in Israel won't bend the knee to this new system either. But I think in that peace deal that comes out of all of this, whatever that peace deal is, or whatever gets confirmed there in Daniel 9:27, either it allows for them to rebuild their temple, or at the end of Gog and Magog, that earthquake completely obliterates the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That all seems like it ties in together, and that allows them or gives the Jews the not only the opportunity to rebuild their third temple, but now they have the backing of this new global government that's coming together after the very calamitous fall of the United States. Now, if you're one that believes that the United States is Babylon, um, well, I mean, we would have to look at a different structure of things. And I know Tyler and I have talked about this quite a bit, and he would look at Revelation 18 in particular. I think he would look at that as a summary, a summarizing of something that happened way earlier. So that the U.S. is Babylon, but she's already collapsed, right? So that chapter 18 in Revelation, even though it's in chapter 18, it's a non-sequential parenthetical insertion, meaning it's just an expansion of something. So, like Revelation 12 is a non-sequential parenthetical insertion. It is an expansion that covers way back into the past, and it also goes into the future. So it's kind of like this chapter right in the middle of Revelation, but it's both goes far, far back before, back in the Old Testament, or back when Christ was born, and then it also goes way into the future as well. So I'm not saying that because the chapter 18 speaks to the collapse of the economic Babylon, as it were, because it's in chapter 18, it's not America. Honestly, I don't know. I think that it is possible that America is Babylon. I'm not saying definitively it's not. I tend to not see it that way, but like I said before, I try to hold these things loosely and just kind of look at them as objectively as I can. Now, let's keep going. And the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So in the beginning, we saw it said, where's it at? In the beginning, it says, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked to me and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication." So he carried me away into the spirit in the wilderness, as I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. So the woman is a great city which rules over the kings of the earth. So the woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy. So the woman is a city. So it seems like this is the center of where this religion is going to headquarter out of. So to me, that makes the most sense for Rome. But like I said earlier, I may be looking at this in limited in my understanding. So just like the Jews that couldn't see or couldn't reconcile that that the same Messiah that they see in Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22 is also the same Messiah that's in Zechariah 14 and Isaiah 11. They couldn't they would thought it was two different people. They didn't realize it was going to be the same person. He was just that was talking about two different comings to the earth. Two different advents. The first advent he would come as a suffering servant. The second advent as the conquering king. So maybe we're looking at it that way too. We're kind of blinded by what we see today, and we can't really see beyond um, what's in our present field of view per se. So I tend to think that the woman is Rome. That's kind of been the traditional view of her, or at least where she's headquartered. But it makes sense in a way that if the rapture happens, and the truth, not if the rapture, but when the rapture happens, if she is, if this harlot is the Roman Catholic system, that's headquartered in the Vatican, and all the true believers from church, from the church age, the dispensation of the church, are now removed from the earth, then what's left is the everybody that's not born again. They don't have the Holy Spirit inside of them to guide them into all truth. What they're left with is just people looking around at chaos, and they're looking for comfort from somewhere. And the Catholic Church, or the Vatican, if that's where it's going to be, is the only religious system in the world today that is structured right now logistically to be able to do that, to really be able to have that kind of global reach. Because if it takes out born again believers, and no, even though like the Southern Baptists have missions all over the world, and the Methodists have missionary groups everywhere, the Episcopalians, the I don't know, Calvary chapels have mission groups. If a majority of those people in those belief systems are taken up, and I'm not saying that they are, but even if enough of them are taken up that those systems collapse in on themselves, the only one that's really going to be left functionally standing, last man standing, as it were, is going to be the Catholic system. So that's all I have for Revelation 17. We're at the end of that chapter there. Friday we'll talk about the other Babylon, the economic Babylon, um, or Babylon the Great, rather. So if you guys have questions, I think somebody was collecting them up, correct? Let me go. Let's see. I'm sure this probably generated a ton of stuff. It's okay. So this is today, right? Today's the 20th. All right. So thank you, Mark Collins and Sir Pierce Seville, for collecting these up for me. Thank you. Other moderators are here, Bema Seat and Coco. Certainly appreciate you guys. And I don't want to forget to thank you at the end. My throat's going dry. Okay, gnarly news. Questions. Question of perdition and question studying Revelation 6:2, 9:11, 11:7, 13:14, and 17:18 are the same. Are these the same person? Thanks. John 5:3 also says Jesus said they would receive one that comes in his name, his own name. Okay. So Revelation 6:2. So we're talking about the rider on the white horse. 9:11, I think, is that the Abaddon guy? Is that 9:11? So yes to Revelation 6:2, if that's the person and not the system. If it's the system, then no. But if it's the man, the Antichrist, the man, then yes. And ultimately, we know that the Antichrist, uh, even we see it kind of used interchangeably, but sometimes it looks like it's a system, and sometimes it looks like it's the man, especially when you get to Revelation 13 and on. But it could be that the man personifies the system in the same way that, I've used this example before, but like when Adolf Hitler comes to personify the Third Reich, when you think about the Third Reich, you think about Adolf Hitler. If you think about Adolf Hitler, you think about Third Reich. He is, that's him. He is that system. So that could be so yes for 6:2, no for 9:11. This king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek is his name Apollyon. I don't think that's him. I think that this thing is released for he's set aside for this specific time and purpose. And it's interesting to me though that Abaddon, there's only four angels named. Is it four? Yeah, four angels named in the Bible: Michael, Gabriel, Lucifer, and Abaddon. So he plays a role, but I don't think that he is. I don't think that he is this guy. I think that I don't think he is the Antichrist. I don't think he is who indwells the Antichrist. You have, and that's just my opinion. If you believe that, feel free. I'm not going to throw blows with you on that. Let's see. Revelation 11:7. When they finish their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. That could be Apollyon. I I I am not convinced that it's not Apollyon. It may be Apollyon on that. But honestly, I don't know. I don't know. It's we know that there's two individuals that are, so Abaddon comes out of the abyss, but all Satan also we know that he's going to get thrown into the abyss, but he also comes out of the abyss as well at the end of the Revelation 20. So who defeats these two witnesses? I tend to think it's going to be Satan, but I could be wrong. And then Revelation, okay, so 11, 7, 13, 14. Okay, I don't see that. 13, 14, 17, 18. Seventeen, 18 says that, and the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So we just talked about that, but uh yeah, this definitely makes, this is what makes Revelation 17 hard, is this exact part of the verse about the one that ascends out was of the seven, now he's the eighth, or all the how it's the way it's worded, it makes it hard to and maybe it makes more sense in the Greek, I don't know. But hopefully I can answer some of the questions. So yes, and then no, and then the other ones I'm not. By these scriptures, is this guy the devil or the Antichrist? 6297. Thanks. And will the devil most likely represent the EU or Israel? I would assume he represents the EU, not Israel. But we do know that Jerusalem is called uh, Sodom in Egypt, where our Lord was crucified. So it seems like at some point during this time period, he is going to set up his headquarters in or around Jerusalem. It seems like it would be inside of Jerusalem where he finally, because ultimately that's where he's going to want to go. And that's where he's going to want to take control of, because that's where everything is going to head towards. And he knows that. So ultimately he's going to be driven to Jerusalem. But I think the harlot sits in Rome. I think that at some point, or after the first purge, and somewhere around the midpoint, the 10 kings are going to overthrow the harlot. Then the Antichrist himself, the headquarters of the kingdom of the beast, where we saw yesterday, or not yesterday, we saw Friday with the bowl judgments, where it talks about the supernatural darkness that was so dark that it was painful. I don't know where the headquarters of the beast kingdom is, and I think that's the big issue that we have today with regard to um, whether Babylon, the literal Babylon, is going to be rebuilt, or is Babylon code name for something else. And we know that in the Bible, the Babylon was used for code in referring to Rome by Peter, but we also know that most of the time in the Old Testament, Babylon meant Babylon. So I do agree with Andy Woods on that part. And I also agree that um, I just say that I have a hard time seeing Babylon be rebuilt inside of Iraq, especially when you get a lot of the passages that talk about, we'll see that in chapter 18, about how the people in their ships are going to see that great city burning and the smoke from her ascending up. You couldn't see that from where Iraq currently, or you couldn't see that now of any city within Iraq because of how far inland it is with Kuwait and all that. Now, Kuwait is a modern construct in terms of how they've divided up the lands and stuff, since World War II. So that I think that used to be part of Iraq back in the day. Um, Iraq, but ancient Babylon, that would have been considered part of ancient Babylon. So that city may have been where Kuwait City is now. And if that were the case, you certainly would have ships that would be able to see it from the Persian Gulf. They would be able to see the city burning. But I don't know what happens to Kuwait after this, if it is absorbed back into and rebranded or remarketed as Babylon, which they may do. Um, you've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've noticed that they're trying to bring back a lot of the old stuff because people are nostalgic for things like that. And I can see a nostalgia building for, I could see them easily rebranding the European Union and calling them the new Roman Republic or the new Roman Empire, and it'll be some kind of imperial system, because it sounds better. And you have, I don't know what the unemployment percentage is in Europe right now. I want to say it's upwards of 25%, and I'm talking about unemployment for younger people like 18 to 25. I mean, unemployment's pretty high, and it wouldn't be that difficult for them to start recruiting to make this massive army. Let me take this question from Sal. Thank you, Sal Ribeiro. Question: do you believe the rapture is imminent, or that it should happen only on the Feast of Trumpets in the next Shemitah year in 2029 through 2030, and why? So I think the rapture is imminent from the sense that we don't know when it is. It's obviously it's not imminent. It's not imminent or unknown from God's perspective. He knows exactly what's going to happen. So from our standpoint, yes, it's imminent because we know it's going to happen. We just don't know when, and that's what makes it imminent. I don't personally subscribe to the rapture happening on any feast date, Jewish feast date or feast of the Lord. I think that that's going to be unique to Israel. If there is a tie-in between the rapture and one of the Jewish feast dates, if I had to pick something, somebody had a gun to my head and said you have to pick a date when you would tie that with the rapture. To me, it would be Pentecost, but because the church began at Pentecost, and I think it could end at Pentecost. But I tend to think if it happens at anything connected to Israel, I think it happens on Tish B'Av, which would be later in July or August timeframe, because that's that traditional day when things have always gone really bad for Israel. Like the first and second temples were destroyed. I mean, there's probably like 20 or 30 different examples through history where bad things have happened to either Israel or to Jewish people on Tish B'Av. So, but as far as the last trumpet goes, I've talked about this a lot. I think if you have that phrasing there in 1 Corinthians 15 of the last trumpet or the last trump, um, if you have a last trumpet, you need by necessity you would have to have a first trumpet in order for you to have a last trumpet. And for me, the first trumpet was in Exodus 19 when the nation of Israel had just come out of Egypt and they gathered together as a nation for the first time before the foot of Mount Sinai. And there, Moses is beginning to get instructions from God. And then people are told to consecrate themselves. And I think on the third day, there was this loud trumpet blast, I mean, from God. And it was so powerful that people were just terrified, freaking out. The whole Mount Sinai was shaking and smoking, and God comes down and Moses goes up, right? That to me is the only thing that really correlates with the same kind of, it's the same in context, and even in foreshadowing, as it were, with Moses going up to the top of the mountain. We are going up, right? We're going up as one body of believers. and it doesn't matter from when, whether you died 500 years ago as a Christian or you died today or you're alive. All Christians from the age of the church, from that first Pentecost till whenever the rapture happens, we are one body of believers. We are the body of Christ. Christ is the head, we are the body. So technically, we are one body going up, even though it may be many, many millions. So we are, in a sense, we are like this mosaic, right, of God's people throughout the last 2,000 years, and we all have different callings and giftings, and we've come from different time periods and cultures and countries and eras of time, and we'll meet Christians that were Christians during during the 12th century and during the 7th century and during the 2nd century and the 3rd century. I mean, it's going to be an amazing meetup together in the sky with believers for the last 2,000 years. It's going to be incredible. I so to answer your question, yes, it's imminent from our perspective. No, from God's perspective. I don't think it's tied in with the Feast of Trumpets at all. I think that's specific to Israel. If there is a tie-in, it would either be Pentecost or Tish B'Av, and then I think that the first trumpet is in Exodus 19. The last trumpet will be in 1 Corinthians 15, 52, and that is because they're the same in context. They're the same, right? I don't see that with any other thing. I don't see that with the trumpet judgments. I don't see that with the Feast of Trumpets. The only other correlation I think could tie in with it is the silver trumpets that are talked about, I think, in Leviticus 16. I think it's Leviticus 16, and that's for the assembling of war, or the assembling, bringing people together, the armies and stuff. That kind of ties in, but I think the closest typology for me is there in Exodus 19. Good question. Thank you. Maranatha, question. Hi, Pete. I was wondering if you heard that God sealed both poles with ice so no one enters the place of the abyss. I heard about it 12 to 13 years ago. Trying to find a link. Maybe Chuck Missler. That that could possibly be it as well. I mean, that can make sense. I mean, it makes sense to me. I've never really thought about it before as being like why they're covered over like that with ice. But if Robert Byrd or Admiral Byrd and his excursion down to the Antarctic in right after World War II, he claims that he saw stuff, and other people have claimed, whatever that's to the what do they call that, to the inner Earth or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I definitely think things are going on up there that the governments don't want us to know about. What exactly that is, I don't know. I don't know if I believe that the abyss is on the earth, though, in a physical sense. Like, I think the abyss is, there may be a portal that God opens up that allows these things to come out of. But just like these UFOs or UAPs that we see flying around, I mean, ultimately, experts have had to come to the conclusion that they're not extraterrestrial, um, meaning that they're not from Earth, but they're from somewhere within our solar system, our galaxy, or whatever, because they would still be bound by the laws of physics, bound by how this reality that we live in, how it operates. So these beings, who I believe to be fallen angels, and they have to be able to operate in and out of our dimension, and that means that they're ultra dimensional, which is the term that most of the UFO experts and all those guys are beginning to refer to them as is ultra dimensional, because they seem to be able to defy the laws of physics. They're not bound by the same rules that we are. Katie Ann says dumbs. You know what? I know that there's a lot of dumbs in the United States, and I know every country's got them. I bet Russia's got a ton of them, and China, United States. I would imagine other countries do too, like Canada and UK and stuff. So I don't know that. I think if we are responsible for opening up this abyss, this portal, Stargate, whatever, um, it may be something that CERN does in one of their experiments, and they accidentally or they intentionally open it up at some point, like that coincides with Revelation chapter 8 there, or is it chapter 9, talking about that the angel that comes out of the abyss. Um, chapter 9, fifth trumpet. So I don't I don't know if the dumbs plays into that necessarily. The dumbs, we don't dig deep enough for those things, I don't think. Maranatha says Chuck Missler said there's no bottom or top in the middle of Earth. Yeah, I he described a bottomless pit as having no bottom. So it's not that you just keep falling forever and ever and ever. There's just, if you're in the center of the earth or whatever, there's no, every way is up, every way is down. There's no, you know what I mean? So it is possible. Um, Certainly something to consider. Gnarly again. Remember when John also wanted Christ to call down fire from heaven, and what Christ said to him, that he didn't know if what spirit he was. I know vaguely what that is, but if you have a passage, I can pull that up. Abel Gurma, do you believe that giants of Kandahar are real? Yes. And from your time in the military. No, I didn't know about them then. I mean, I was in Afghanistan in 2008, all of 2008, and then half of 2013. And while I was there at that time, I didn't know anything about Nephilim. I wasn't, I didn't know in 2008, and then in 2013, I was at that point I was studying prophecy and all that at that point, but I don't know. I don't think I had any knowledge of giants in Kandahar, because if I had, I certainly been like Sherlock Holmes looking for all kind of stuff while I was there, but I didn't know about it at the time. I wish I had. I wish I had known about it then. Okay. That Sal again. Interesting. Chuck has noted that Enoch is a type of church, and that he was raptured on the day of his anniversary, the Pentecost day. Yeah, I mean, we don't know that 100%. It sounds good. I think he's getting that from the Book of Enoch, maybe, which is non-canonical, and we don't know who wrote it. There's three versions of the Book of Enoch. There was one that was pre-Christ, that was included in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have another one that was first or second century, and then there was one, the last Enoch came out like in the Middle Ages at some point. Um, but we don't know who wrote the Book of Enoch. The Enoch one, or one Enoch, has a lot of correlations with Genesis, and has a lot of things that make biblical sense. There are stuff later in the book that are not perfectly coinciding with the Bible's account of stuff. So I think you take the Book of Enoch with a grain of salt. And I know, I mean, I've met Chuck before. He's a great guy, before he passed. And I have a photo with him somewhere. I've got to try and find it. But he was certainly willing to expand the boundaries of possibility. And I like to do that too, but I don't think I would be super, dogmatic about that. Give me 1 second, guys. Let's see.
All right. Sorry about that. Let's see. Find out where I was. Jenny Ryan, question: why is there 30 minutes of silence in heaven? I honestly, when you read through Revelation, you notice that heaven is very noisy. I mean, you've got angels worshiping, you've got the cherubim flying through, and they're, um, you know, singing or praising God, yeah, in His holiness and all that. And the elders are worshiping God, the angels, so they're singing, and there's all this stuff going on. And when you get between the sixth seal and the seventh seal, it's like this ominous, it's like the calm before the storm sort of thing, where it gets real quiet, and we know that things are about to be escalated very seriously at this point. So each of the seventh iteration of something, the seventh seal and the seventh trumpet, in that seventh seal contains the seven trumpets. And that's why it's the seventh is the most severe of each of those. So the seventh unlocks the other seven trumpets, and then the seventh trumpet unlocks the seven bowl judgments. And then the seven thunders, I don't know if those are judgments or if those what those are necessarily, but um, if they are judgments, then there would be a total of 28 divine judgments that hit the earth. Um, so that's why there's silence with the seventh seal, because of what's about to be unleashed is going to be. I mean, things that happen in the sixth seal. I mean, the seal judgments aren't a walk in the park. Let's just get that out of the way. It's not going to be like how the pre-wrath guys say it, where the world's just going to be all nice and peaceful for the first half of it, and then it starts getting bad. No, the first half with the seal judgments is going to be horrifying. I mean, you're talking about the deaths of uh, a quarter of the world's population. So just, I'm not taking out the rapture folks or whatever. I'm just using today's population numbers. But if you have 8 billion people, then a quarter of that would be 2 billion people that will die in just a matter of a couple of years. That's that in and of itself is mind numbing, because if you take everybody that's died from war for the last 6,000 years, that's maybe half a billion, maybe over 6,000 years or so. And now you have 2 billion that die in just a matter of 2 to 3 years. I mean, we haven't really seen carnage. We've never seen carnage at that level before. Um, so yeah, but it's even going to get way worse with the trumpet judgments, because then a third. So if that leaves you with 6 billion people that are left on the earth after the trumpet judgments, by the time you get to the end of the trumpet, or by the end of the seal judgments, by the end of the trumpet judgments, a third of that is going to be killed. So that's another 2 billion that's taken out of that. So now you're down to half, 4 billion people by the end of the trumpet judgments. And again, we don't know what the thunder judgments are, or if they're judgments at all, but whatever they are, presumably they are just some kind of judgments. That's going to kill a great percentage, and then the bowl judgments will kill a great percentage of people. So by the time you get to Armageddon, I mean, you may only have about a billion people left, and then Armageddon in and of itself is going to kill a huge number of people, which we don't know how many that is. So we just know it's the world's greatest battle or army array that's ever brought together. All right. Question from Grace Through Faith. Question: if you could meet one figure from the Old Testament, which one would you choose? Hmm. Probably Enoch. I would like to know what the world was like in that time, and then what he knew. What did he know about the end? We know what Jude wrote about quoting Enoch, but it'd be cool to meet him. I'd like to meet Joseph. I mean, probably my favorite story from the Old Testament is the life of Joseph. I love reading that. I just love how that his story plays out, and you can tell he was kind of, you could tell he was probably had a good
mischievous sense about them, you know. But yeah. All right. I think that's it. So Joseph or Enoch, probably Enoch and then Joseph. So, oh, whew. All right. Well, that was a lot. We are at 2 hours, almost 3 hours right now. So, what? Yeah, one more. Jenny Whittle. Hi, brother. Pete sent you an email question. Haven't heard back. What happens to all the aborted and miscarried babies growing up in heaven, transported to the earth to populate to populate in the millennium? I don't know. I don't know if the aborted babies and those that die in miscarriage and all that. Um, I really don't know what I don't know if they I mean I would think that now they are in their spirit form. They're probably in the mid 20s and they're living forever with the Lord. They will have that they won't have known anything different. I don't know that they're brought back to the earth to repopulate the millennium. I think that the people that survive the tribulation in their mortal bodies will be the ones that repopulate the millennium. Um, and they're still going to be in their sin. I mean, they're still going to be in their mortal fleshly bodies. Their offspring will be in their mortal bodies. The church, like us, those that have been raptured and translated or resurrected and translated, we are not going to be in our mortal bodies. We will be in our glorified bodies, ruling and reigning with the Lord. But there will be a percentage, a small percentage of people that enter into the kingdom in their physical bodies. And, we know that the world started off with two people and it started again with 8 people, after Noah and the flood. So, it would take a lot of people to kickstart the human population again. So, as far as those babies that died, I think they're in their spirit form now. Uh, reading when Paul writes about, he's describing our body as it is now. It's like a tent, but we're waiting for this body that we're going to get that's made. It's like a building. That's the difference between the flesh that we have now and the flesh that we're going to get, the immortal bodies that we're going to get. Um, I don't know that they would go from being in their perfected state now in heaven, not having known anything different, and then being brought back to the earth. But they could be. I mean, it's possible. It's certainly possible. It's a good question. But none of us, I don't know that. Really, I don't know the answer to that. And I don't think any other person alive today would know the answer to that, other than to say that it's possible that God could do that, since they never really got a chance to live. But, whatever God decides to do with them, we know they're in heaven. We know they're enjoying eternal bliss right now, in the perfected state. So um, they they may not want to they may not want to come back. I mean, as awesome as heaven is, it's like everybody that's ever described it, it's like, man, I did not like they none of them want to come back. So it's there it is. Thank you, Bubba or David. 2 Corinthians 5:5. See if I can show the whole thing. For we know that if the earthly tent, which is our house, is torn down, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, in the heavens. Yeah, so we're getting our Superman bodies at that some point. Yeah, I like Katie's answer here. Um, by the Spirit, I've seen the billions of children. The kingdom of God is for the children. They are forever blessed with Jesus. I, I don't think. I think that would be more of a punishment, having them come back, even if it's to the millennial kingdom. But they may come down in a glorified form and help rule and reign in the kingdom age too. I mean, I don't know. Do you think eternally blessed 777? Do you think we will get all of our questions answered with our worldly memory wiped clean? Honestly, I think that the minute you die, even if you die right now, when you wake up in your you wake up in your we won't be in our glorified bodies yet until the rapture, but in your spirit body there in heaven, you're just going to instinctively know things that. So Terry James, the guy that I co-wrote a bunch of books with, I've talked to him about this, and he, if I remember our conversation correctly, he said he knew things that he shouldn't know. He had never learned or anything like that, but he just kind of knew it the minute that he was in the in heaven, or at least in the, I don't know what you call it, the where he when at his out of body experience when he died, he coded out clinically dead in the back of ambulance after a heart attack, and however long he was in heaven, which may have been like, in human terms, it may have been like 10, 15 seconds until they were able to revive him. But there, it may have felt a lot more because he didn't. You're not in time anymore. But if I remember correctly, he instinctively knew things. And there's another guy that he was a, man, what's his name? He was a Marine, and he died. He had an out of body experience, or he died in his body, and he woke up in complete darkness, and he knew he was standing on something, but he couldn't tell what he was standing on because he couldn't see anything. And when he began to think about things, he could hear himself outside of himself. He could hear himself think out loud, and he knew, like he just said, he knew why he was there. He knew he didn't have any questions, like uh I don't know, think of a question, but he said he knew. He said it was the weirdest thing. Anyways, he was brought back by, he said, an angel. And you got to listen to his testimony. I typically don't believe a lot of these things, but his was very powerful and very like, um I can't think of that guy's name. Um he was a Marine. He was in 29 Palms, and he was stationed there. Him and his buddies were playing they were doing something, trying to they were trying to stage a hanging, like a guy hung himself, but his buddies didn't realize that he was really choking, and they thought it was like one of those fail-proof slip knots or whatever, where you wouldn't choke when he was choking. And by the time that uh, he noticed something was wrong, he had stepped out of his own body and was looking at himself. And then he realized what was going on. He tried to jump back into his body, and it kicked him out. And he woke up in this place that was completely dark. And he describes meeting this demon, and he said it was the most horrifying experience. Like, he goes in a lot of detail on this, but if I find that, I have to go and find his testimony on it. It was very powerful, and I reached out to him. This was years and years ago, um, and yeah, it changed him forever. So I just think that you will instinctively, like all questions we have right now about, what was like flood, all that stuff. Like, we won't even have to ask those questions because we'll already know what they are. Medusa Queen question: how high is the probability that the rapture is going to happen in 2025? Do you believe that rapture can happen on Rosh Hashanah? So the rapture, any date. I know that I don't look at feast dates typically. For me, I don't associate the rapture with the feast dates. I associate those feasts of the Lord with Israel, because God gave them to Israel to maintain and to keep. There was no such requirement for the church. So I don't know why we would be tied in with that necessarily. And like I said before, I think the rapture, if it happens and it has any kind of tie-in with anything to do with Israel or the feasts, it would either be Pentecost for me or Tish B'Av, and that's it. Like, I think the fall feasts are done in relation to the nation of Israel, and since Christ has already fulfilled the first spring feast, you have the long summer gap between the spring and the fall. I think the fall speaks to the things that are pertaining to the nation of Israel and bringing them back into um, relationship with Him. Leave that off there. How high is the probability that the rapture is going to happen in 2025? I I mean, this is just my opinion and just my personal, you know, thoughts on it. I think of 2025. I've told Tyler and other guys this going back a year or two now, that I think I've always kind of looked favored 2025. So the summer of 2025 is kind of my time when I'm thinking, okay, I'm be really interested to see if it happens. The problem with rapture dating and all that kind of stuff is, even if I'm right, I mean, if I'm right, we're only going to know if it happens, and then the second that it happens, it's not going to matter anymore. Like nobody's going to care whether I was right or not. So I don't know. I never saw the point in like trying to pinpoint it necessarily, and I certainly wouldn't do it to sell books or anything like that. Like that, that's not um, like the 88 reasons, and there's other guys that have tried to figure out a date, and they think they have the math on it right. I don't know. I looked at, Tyler and I did the Final Four. We looked at a whole bunch of different things, and it just seems like it everything kind of culminates during this decade for the rapture, and then 2030s for the second coming. And since we can't pinpoint anything to the rapture, we really are forced to look at the second coming. So what is necessary for the second coming to happen? Well, Israel has to be back in their land. They have to be back in control of Jerusalem. They have to have a third temple. So you're not going to have an abomination that causes desolation unless you have a third temple. You got to have that third temple standing, and you're not going to have the third temple standing unless the Jews control the Temple Mount, and they're not going to control the Temple Mount unless they control unless they control Jerusalem, and they're not going to control Jerusalem unless Israel is a nation again. So, kind of looking at it from backwards planning from that, the abomination can only happen if Israel's a nation again. So that's one aspect of it. The technology has to be there to support the scenario in Revelation 11, where everybody in the world sees these two witnesses, sees their bodies laying on the streets dead. That technology has to be there, which it is today. The mark of the beast technology has to be there for Revelation 13. We certainly have many different kind of options these days as to what the mark could actually look like. That's what makes it hard now is we don't know which technology or which way it's going to happen. We just know that we have the capability to do it now. So um, I don't see anything really stopping us from going up sometime in 2025. It may happen before then. It could happen today, tomorrow. Could happen. I don't know. I mean, I think we're in that window now, but there is a possibility that 2025 comes and goes, and so then we look at 2026, and that was kind of the 4-year window, was 2023 to 2026. So then if it goes beyond 2026, then we can't tie the second coming to 2033, which is the latest um, date for the crucifixion, the 2000th anniversary of the crucifixion. So some people believe Jesus was crucified in the year 30 AD. Some people think 31. Some think 32. Some think 30. I think 33. So that's kind of why we had that 4-year window, is between 30 and 33, and it's all really tied around Christ's second, uh, our 2000th anniversary. And if you look back through history, from Adam to Abraham was 2,000 years, roughly. From Abraham to Christ's first advent was 2,000 years. So from Christ's first advent to his second coming, or to his second advent, if pattern holds true, then there should be he should be tied with 2033 in some way, shape, or form. It is also possible that that the 2033 may be the midpoint of the tribulation. So if that's the case, then the tribulation wouldn't start until 2030, and you know really between now and 2030, any of those times would be a good time for the rapture. The 70th jubilee, which is goes back, uh I have it on my if you find that, there's a program that Tyler and I did called the Final Two or something, I think it's called, which we just did last week. If you look at that video, we go into all that. But I also looked beyond 2033. I looked at 2048 and 2074 as being like the very outer limits. And the further that the thing is, the further that we get away from 2033, the less and less signs seem to make sense. And before long, looking for signs becomes relatively meaningless because we will have blown past every kind of type and shadow and pattern and everything. We have blown past all of those, and just um, nothing will really make sense anymore. Now, Sir Isaac Newton did think that it was going to be the second coming would be around 2060. And I don't know how he came up with that number. I'd have to go back and research how Sir Isaac Newton came up with that idea, but he's like all of us. I mean, we're all kind of looking and trying to make sense of all this stuff. So I think once we move past the majority or the plurality of signs that we could look for, things become have less and less meaning. And a perfect example of this is like going back to the year 1900. Back in 1900, if you're a Christian and you're waiting for the Lord to return, what signs did you have available for you at that time? You had the fact that the gospel really had been going out to most places around the world. Not every single tribe, and village and enclave and little city had it, but almost certainly every country had the gospel, had already been gone through there at least once or twice or maybe three times. And we look at today and we think, okay, well, most of the Middle East is Muslim, and the gospel isn't permeating all of those places. But we got to remember that's where Christianity started. So for the first 5, 6 centuries, Christianity was all over the Middle East, and it wasn't until Islam came along that it drove out Christianity from most of those nations. So Christianity was already in those countries; they just had been pushed out. Are we saying that they have to be fully gospeled? In the vein of Matthew 28 again a second time? I don't know, but I think the gospel's already gone out. 1900, this is already at the tail end of most of the major missionary movements, or toward the end of the missionary church age. And so you would have had the gospel, but that's really it. I mean, because Israel wasn't a nation yet. You might have believed that Israel would have to become a nation again, but um, that wouldn't happen for another 48 years. And we're looking back on hindsight, and we look back and think, okay, well, I would have seen Israel become if we lived back in 1900 and we didn't know any better, we would have had no idea when Israel was going to become a nation again. In fact, we didn't know about World War I. We didn't know about World War II. We didn't know about any of those things because we were limited to the knowledge and information that was available in the year 1900. So at that time, looking for signs was relatively meaningless. I mean, you had the birth pang signs like the wars and rumors of war and that kind of stuff, but we'd always have wars. In that dynamic or that paradigm wasn't going to really shift until World War One. And after World War One, we saw, wow, war can really be. I mean, World War One, the world had never seen warfare at that level for that long, to that size and scale of it. Um, Most of the wars that were fought in Europe or other, one country taking over another country, and they're having to ride horses. Think Napoleon or Genghis Khan or stuff like that. So people were limited by, logistically, they were limited by how far they could travel. So if you're in the year 1900 looking for signs, it would have been incredibly difficult to really try to pinpoint anything. The only thing, and this would have been if you had knowledge of it, but if you were paying attention in 1897, you might have seen that Theodor Herzl convened the first Zionist Congress in Austria. I think it was in Austria. Um, it may have been France, but I think it was Austria. And you would have seen that, and you would have thought, that's interesting. The Jews want to go back to Israel. And you would have thought, okay, I believe Israel has to become a nation again because the Bible says it does, but you wouldn't have known when. Likewise, when we go past 2033 and we start pushing out into the 20, and I'm not saying that we are, but if we did, we would begin to lose the signs, and the things that we've all been looking at would have start to become pretty meaningless at that point. And then also you got to look at the other constraint being that Revelation doesn't mention specific technologies, but it talks about technological capabilities. And if we move into a time where we begin to exceed those capabilities, let's say we move to the year 2035 and Elon Musk gets the first successful colony set up in Mars, well, then that's exceeded the technology that we see in Revelation, because when God pours out his judgments on the earth, he's talking to the earth dwellers and to those who dwell on the earth. There's no mention of anybody living in the International Space Station or colonies on the moon or colonies on Mars or other things. So it seems to me that the longer we wait, the more mature all this technology becomes, and it pushes us out to it pushes out beyond what Revelation states will have available for the world of Revelation 13. I think likewise too. There's this. Oh man, I just had this thought, and I just the only way that we could reset that technology, or that this current trajectory we are on with how fast technology is going, is if we had, like right now, if we have some kind of World War III happen and it resets the world significantly in a technological way. So, for example, let's say that Biden was successful and World War III has started. Don't get me wrong; it's already begun, but it hasn't gone nuclear yet, right? But even if and when it does go nuclear, let's say Russia launched 1,000 ICBMs at the United States, or supersonic nuclear tipped missiles, and we were able to destroy a bunch. And if we destroyed them in the atmosphere, we destroyed them in space, because some of those are going suborbital. I think that's what it's called. But if you blew up a missile in space and it had a nuclear explosion in space, that would cause an EMP effect. That would wipe out all the think about all the satellites that are up there floating around, and there's a EMP type effect that happens from a nuclear explosion in space. I mean, there's certain ways that we could be reset technologically that would set us back a number of years, and that's certainly a possibility. But then it tends to go against all these other things, like button up against Israel being a nation. They turn 80 in 2028, I believe. The U.S. is just, gonna, in 2026, I think she has her 250th anniversary. So it just seems like so much is kind of culminating right here now. It seems like, to push this out way out, into 2030s, 2040s, it seems like we're pushing way beyond the bulk of the signs. It's like all the signs are here right now. Okay. All right. We are at 3 hours and 10 minutes. I am definitely going to call it for tonight. Thank you guys for hanging out tonight. You had a lot of places you could have been. Yeah, you didn't have to be hanging out here with me, but definitely appreciate you coming. Hopefully, Revelation 17 is a little bit more accessible to you now. And I don't pretend to have Revelation 17 all figured out, but I think that we can certainly try to make some sense of it, right? We could try to gain some understanding from it, and in seeing some correlations going on in the world today, where we can see things in Revelation 17 make a lot more sense on today's standard, because we have things that we can draw examples to, like with Elon Musk and the push for globalism and so forth. So hopefully you got something out of tonight. I'll hang all these charts. I'll hang these all on my website, rev310.net. I'll put the link in the show notes here. I'll have to do it here in a little bit. And if you guys want to grab them, I'll just put them as JPEGs. You can copy and save them there. But Wednesday night, no, wait, today is Wednesday. Friday night, um, I will do, I may pre-record Friday night depending on my travel schedule. But that will be Revelation 18, and that will be the economic or Babylon the Great chapter. And then we're down to really just the last few chapters of Revelation. So I'll have something for Monday, or for not Monday. Yeah, Monday and Wednesday, since next week is Thanksgiving. So um, we'll have those. Wednesday for sure will be a pre-record. But that will be Revelation 20, I think. So unless you want me to do Revelation 20 as a live stream. If you rather do that as a live stream rather than a pre-recorded one, you can definitely do that. Just let me know what you guys think. Back to lip reading. You talk about me? uh, yep. Yeah. Thank you guys. Thank you, mods. Thank you guys for asking the questions, for participating. I try to make this stuff as accessible to y'all as possible, and keep looking up. I mean, I I don't want to just get everybody, hyper focused on next summer, because I look at next summer, but we should be looking up every day. And it's certainly possible the Lord could come today, could come tomorrow. It's all in his timing and his perfect timing. So whenever it happens, it'll be the perfect time. But it'll definitely be interesting between now and inauguration day. I wrote my article, The Last Election. I put in there some hypothetical situations in there. And my first hypothetical was, we won't have an election, or will we have an election? Yes or no? And if we yes, or if no, then what causes that? And then if yes, then what causes that? And then if we have an election, who wins the election? Um, if they allow Trump to win, that's one. Yet that's one course of action. If they don't allow him to win, they try and steal it from him again. That's another course of action. And then you get to inauguration day. If they lose, and will they actually concede power back over to Trump? And it seems like the Democrats are all out of gas, but the deep state is still trying to figure out a way to prevent this. So they're trying to push us into World War III quickly, so they can declare martial law and kind of hijack the election that way. So that's certainly a possibility. But I don't know. Right now, everything seems to be lined up for Trump, in a pretty big way. I even think he'll get all of his nominations, or most of his nominations. So it's going to be crazy. It's interesting times for sure to be alive. So thank you guys. God bless you. And then we'll see you on Wednesday. And pray that you have a great rest of your week. So love you. Thank you. Talk to you soon.